Most people miss the real story. Subscribe if you want to see everything.
Imagine being the only person to survive a death game, only to be killed at the very last second. That's what happened to our MC, but now he's back with all his memories, and he's about to turn this entire game into his personal playground. The silver moon hung high in the sky as the silence of the night was broken by a solemn realization that it was finally time. Looking down upon the grand, multi-tiered temple bathed in blue light, the narrator reflected on how their clan had been utterly destroyed by the demonic sect. Despite the tragedy, the survivors had struggled to endure for one single purpose, and that was for their revenge. A cloaked figure moved with lethal grace through the dark trees, their eyes fixed on the torches flickering along the temple walls. The dark-haired warrior moved like a shadow, leaping through the branches until he reached the perimeter. Near a stone pillar topped with a roaring fire, a lone sentry stood guard, unaware of the danger. Suddenly, a hand wreathed in golden energy reached out from the darkness, and with a swift movement, the guard was silenced. The warrior knew that it would not take long before the others noticed the sentry had disappeared, so he resolved to finish his mission before that could happen. Standing over the fallen body in the flickering light of the brazier, he prepared himself for the final confrontation. Inside the temple, amidst a swirling mist of blue energy, a man with long white hair sat in deep meditation. He remarked to himself that it was quite noisy outside. As the dark-haired warrior stepped into the chamber, carrying the limp body of another guard, the white-haired man opened one glowing red eye. The intruder pointed out that it was quite something for the leader to be peacefully meditating while his subordinates were dying, calling him heartless as usual. The white-haired man remained unfazed, suggesting that he could say the exact same thing about the warrior for running amok without knowing anything. He questioned if a man would ever care about the insects beneath his feet while he was busy climbing toward a mountain peak. Glaring at his opponent, the white-haired master continued, stating that such a man only stares at the peak because that is the only way to reach the pinnacle of martial arts. The intruder dismissed this as complete nonsense. Identifying himself as Kong Wunshin, he declared that he would kill the man with his own hands today, addressing him finally as the heavenly demon. Kong Wunshin lunged forward, his body erupting with surges of blue electricity. He unleashed the heavenly lightning fist, a strike that tore through the air with a deafening crackle of power. The heavenly demon met the assault with a mocking grin, asking if that was truly all the boy had to offer. The master of the demonic sect countered by activating his heavenly blood-tide art, telling his opponent to watch and learn as a massive pillar of red energy exploded from his palm. The force of the collision sent a shockwave through the room, and Kong Wunshin groaned in pain as the red energy seared his skin. He was stunned, realizing that the man had produced such powerful sword chi with nothing but his bare hand. The heavenly demon loomed over him, his face twisted in a cruel smile as he promised to send the boy to join his father this very day. He declared that Kong Wunshin was finished. However, Kong Wunshin refused to fall, summoning his inner strength for the Cloud Dragon Divine Fist. He whispered the word transcend before launching the heavenly divine palm. The blue energy shattered the heavenly demon's defense, leaving the master in a state of pure shock. The demon could not believe that his steel tempering, which made his fists harder than actual steel, had just lost to a pair of bare hands. A massive explosion of blue light engulfed the room, and when the dust settled, the heavenly demon was wounded and gasping for air. Kong Wunshin stood before him, panting heavily, and warned the demon never to dare speak about his father again with such a dirty mouth. He demanded to know if the demon had forgotten all the evil deeds he had committed over the years, proclaiming that his strike carried the concentrated rage of all the people who had suffered. The heavenly demon clutched his chest, coughing as he admitted he should have wiped out the roots of the Cloud Dragon sect long ago. He confessed his surprise at whatever enlightenment the boy had received, finding it hard to believe that his heavenly demon blood surge art had been broken. Driven to desperation, he pulled out a small container, stating that he had been left with no other choice. Kong Wunshin's eyes widened as he realized the man was holding an elixir. He knew that if the demon drank that much medicine at once, he would surely undergo a violent demonic chi deviation. The bottle shattered as the heavenly demon consumed its contents, and a terrifying purple aura erupted from his body. He let out a guttural scream of agony as the power overwhelmed him. Kong Wunshin was forced back by the sheer pressure, groaning as the purple light threatened to consume everything. Just then, a mysterious voice echoed, calling out to the child. The demon roared that it was time for Kong Wunshin to disappear forever. The young warrior felt a sense of dread, realizing he was too late to stop the transformation. But as the purple energy lunged toward him, a soft green light manifested, and a calm voice commanded a barrier to form. The lethal energy was deflected by a shimmering green shield. A hooded man carrying a staff stepped out of the light, apologizing for being a bit late and admitting he had been caught lazing around. Kang Wunshin looked up in awe, calling the newcomer a great mage. The man told him not to use such a stuffy nickname, then looked toward the demonic master and asked if this was the nemesis they had been talking about. The narrator explained that this mage was someone who claimed to have come from another world, and that without his help, Kang Wunshin would have died a helpless death. Suddenly, the scene shifted to a modern room where a young man shouted in frustration, telling the story to wait. He questioned how a regular Murum story could suddenly introduce a high-level mage from a different world out of nowhere. Jin Seowoon, a 23-year-old man, sat on his couch and complained that the author must be out of his mind for killing the mood with such a bizarre twist. He couldn't wrap his head around how another world made any sense in this context. Seowoon explained that he had been discharged from the military 6 months ago and was currently preparing to head back to college. His phone began to buzz loudly with a message from a friend asking if he was up and ready to play a game. Seowoon sighed, wondering if the guy had anyone else in his life to play with. He reflected on how he, like many who finished their service, had a solid life plan before being discharged. He had intended to earn certifications and study all the things he missed while in the military, but the fun things in society were simply too distracting. Walking through the city streets at night, he checked his wallet and saw he still had some money left, though he debated whether he should find a part-time job. As a devoted Murum fan, he often lost himself in fantasies of being a protagonist in such a world, but his reality was much different. He arrived at an internet cafe where the owner greeted him by name, asking if he was going to play Loyal Ground again. Seowoon confirmed he wanted 10 hours of game time. He had sunk countless hours into the game, and even though it was just a hobby, he had played seriously enough to become a top 10 ranker within 3 months of his discharge. He occasionally made some spare change from local tournaments held at the cafes. As he put on his headset and logged in, he told his friend to wait for him in the lobby. The game, Loyal Ground, involved 100 players dropping from a plane into a survival map where they had to kill each other until only one remained. In the virtual world, Seowoon's character dove through the clouds. Once on the ground, he checked his coordinates, noting he saw 2 people 250 meters away. A sniper shot rang out, and a player with a skull mask opened fire. Seowoon watched as a helmet was blown off and a player was eliminated by a headshot. His teammate began shouting excitedly about there being only 2 people left, but Seowoon told him to be quiet, reminding him that he had already died once and should stop yapping. He took cover behind a stone wall, telling his friend that they needed to farm for gear and stay alive in the safe zone. His friend replied that he only believed in Seowoon, which earned him a quick command to shut up. Seowoon moved cautiously through a ruined city, wondering where the player with the skull mask had gone. He entered a building and noticed that all the loot was still there, concluding the enemy hadn't visited this spot yet. As he approached a medical kit, he thought he found free loot, but a shadow suddenly appeared behind him. The skull-masked player was waiting. A notification appeared on the screen stating that his teammate had died. Seowoon realized the enemy had been hiding inside all along and scrambled to get out of the room. He ran through the corridors as bullets whizzed past his head, but eventually, the screen flashed with a message of congratulations, announcing he was the last person remaining. His friend cheered, admitting he had been carried through the match and thanked Seowoon. Seowoon told him to queue up for another round, but as he looked at the clock, he realized it was late. He decided he should lock in and actually start studying the next day. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from his mother. She asked if he was studying well and told him she had sent money for his academy fees along with a little extra for food, apologizing that she couldn't send more. Seowoon felt a pang of guilt, thanking her and saying he was going to sleep soon. He told his friend he wasn't going to play anymore starting tomorrow because he had to attend an English academy. His friend was disappointed, reminding him they had promised to go to a clan war together. Walking home, Seowoon looked at the neon signs of the city, feeling guilty every time he saw his mother's texts. He had been living this way for months. Back in his room, he lay in bed scrolling through his phone. A news report mentioned that people with mysterious powers called players were being spotted abroad. He tried to click on a link, but the page didn't exist, and he wondered if the video had been deleted. Deciding to just go to sleep, he closed his eyes. The next morning, as he walked through a narrow alley, a message from his friend popped up asking for help with the clan war one last time. Seowoon hesitated, wondering if he should help him out for a final game. Suddenly, a strange purple glow began to emanate from his body. He looked down in shock, asking what the light was. Within seconds, the light intensified, and with a sudden flash, Seowoon vanished completely, leaving only his backpack sitting on the pavement. He opened his eyes to find himself in a completely different place. A voice in the distance spoke in a foreign tongue, calling out about a glowing bolt and suggesting they join in. Seowoon looked around in total confusion, wondering where the hell he was. He found himself standing in the middle of a massive crowd of people dressed in ancient armor and robes, all of them looking toward a distant goal. He stood there, a modern young man in a tracksuit, lost in a world that looked exactly like the stories he loved to read. Jin Seowoon wondered what that strange light was, questioning if he was being punished just because his resolve to study had shattered in a single day. As the brilliant glow faded, he found himself being shoved and touched by strangers in a chaotic, sunlit field. A hand rested on his head while a foreign voice shouted something about it being useless and suggesting they join in right now. Seowoon groaned, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the noise and wondering why it was so loud. Nearby, men in armor and robes engaged in frantic combat, their voices clashing in a language he could not understand, urging each other to fight and decide the outcome. As he watched a swordsman and a mage trade blows, he questioned what the hell was happening, wondering why there were so many cosplayers around. As a mage in white robes cast a spell, Seowoon looked at the fantastical scene and began to wonder if this was all just a dream. He looked around at the vast army of warriors and asked where he was, feeling small in his modern tracksuit. Suddenly, a loud chime echoed in his mind, and a system message appeared, announcing that 100 players had been detected. Seowoon jumped, shocked to realize he was hearing a voice directly inside his head. The blue-hued interface continued its process, stating it was now initializing the system. Seowoon could only stare in disbelief as the words regarding the system flashed before his eyes. Another notification confirmed that language synchronization was 100% complete. A man standing nearby looked around in confusion, asking where the voice was coming from, and Seowoon realized with a start that everyone was suddenly speaking Korean. Another player nearby noted with surprise that everyone was suddenly speaking his language. Nearby, a swordsman pointed his blade at an opponent, declaring that he had been waiting for this day to face an enemy of his sect. A tall, blonde elf-like mage holding a glowing staff looked at a sinister, hooded figure and asked if a man named Kairon was the one who got them into this situation. Kairon, a skeletal-looking warrior with glowing eyes, chuckled and asked the mage, Escrow, if he wasn't the one who had actually dragged him there. Escrow called the man shameless, stating he would no longer be fooled by his words. Kairon laughed, telling him it didn't matter what he believed since everyone was fated to kneel before the Demon King's power. Escrow, identifying himself as an archmage, promised to kill the villain right there and end the Demon King soon after. The mage unleashed a massive blast of Escrow-style lightning that illuminated the entire field with blue energy. Despite the intensity of the strike, Kairon stood unmoved, noting that he took the magic head-on but wondered why he didn't feel anything at all. Seowoon watched the spectacle, realizing this was far too realistic to be a dream as he watched the two powerful beings bicker about who dragged him into the mess. Another chime announced the beginning of the game. The system set the difficulty to easy, informing the participants that they needed to get into the top 90 players to survive. The map was designated as the King Kingdom's capital, with higher rewards promised for those who made it to the top 10 and above. The system then decided to skip the tutorial entirely, noting that attacks between players were neutralized while in the waiting room. Seowoon looked at a holographic screen floating in the air, recognizing it as a game map. A massive, stone-faced statue loomed over the crowd, offering a brief explanation for those accessing Cloyd Survival for the first time. The entity explained that the game would progress for 100 years, and each day the playable map would become more limited. It warned that if anyone exited the limited map, they would be subjected to great harm, so they should be careful. The goal was simple: the game would continue until there was only one survivor left. If the game finished or a player was eliminated, they would return to their original world. However, players who failed to reach the top 90 would not be able to partake in Cloyd Survival again. The statue told them they would soon descend to a location of their choice with the help of Argas Gaze, where they could find items to help them survive. The message ended with a wish for luck to be with them. Seowoon broke into a cold sweat, wondering if he was actually dreaming about the game Loyal Ground. He looked at the hardened warriors around him, realizing that amidst these absurd humans, he would surely die. He swallowed hard, deciding that even if this were a dream, he did not want to die. He resolved that if this really was like the game log, then he had to act. A large man in heavy armor approached him, calling him messy hair and asking why he was looking around. When Seowoon didn't answer, the man demanded to know where he was from, asking if he was being ignored. A countdown appeared in the air, signaling the game would start in 3 seconds. As the timer hit 1, the warrior shouted at Seowoon, asking why he was laughing and if he was insane. Seowoon didn't care, thinking that since he was dreaming such a fun dream, there was no reason not to laugh. He realized that with his knowledge of the game's mechanics, he could easily defeat people like this and survive. The warrior began to curse him, but the game officially started, and everyone was launched into the sky in pillars of light. Seowoon plummeted through the air, watching as other players descended toward crowded areas where items were plentiful. He knew those spots would be dangerous, so he decided it would be better to start on the outskirts to stay safe. Spotting a small house in the distance, he shouted for the system to descend, and he went crashing toward the building in a flash of light. He landed roughly on the grass, groaning as he struggled to stand. He felt a wave of motion sickness wash over him, but he forced himself to move toward the house. As he approached the door, he heard a rustling sound from within and froze. He panicked, realizing that because of the motion sickness, he hadn't seen who else might have landed nearby. If he came across an enemy without a weapon, he knew he would be finished. He ducked behind a wooden pillar, sweating as he wondered if the sword-wielding man from earlier had followed him. He regretted provoking him. After a moment of silence, he peeked out the window. Seeing nothing but the wind blowing through the trees and the bright blue sky, he realized he didn't hear any more sounds. He decided to search the house, knowing the system said to get items from wherever they landed. His foot hit something on the floor with a dull thud, and a message appeared informing him that he had obtained a heavy crossbow. He picked up the large wooden weapon, noting it was very heavy but still better than nothing. As soon as he equipped it, the knowledge of how to use it flowed naturally into his head. He reminded himself that for a South Korean army sergeant, this was nothing. He practiced aiming the weapon, realizing that if he did it right, it would shoot. He pulled the trigger, and a bolt flew across the room with incredible force, shattering a barrel with a loud explosion of wood. He was amazed, thinking this would be super useful if he learned to use it properly. He looked around more but couldn't find anything else of value. He noted that the map was huge, which was a good thing since he could farm safely if he avoided enemies at the start. He headed toward another room and saw something glowing on a desk. Picking up a scroll, the system told him he had obtained a small healing scroll. He read the description, seeing that ripping the scroll would heal his injuries. Deciding he should gather as many recovery items as possible, he wished for an item bag. He then spotted a purple book on a shelf. Touching it, the system announced he had found the Black Star Leader's martial arts book. It explained that this was a martial art that allowed him to project dark energy through his fingers. Seowoon was shocked, wondering if he could really learn it just like that or if he needed to start a tutorial. He opened the book, and it suddenly erupted in a blinding purple light. The pages disintegrated and swirled around him before being absorbed into his body. He looked at his hands, wondering if that was it. He felt a strange warmth, and as he focused, his hand began to glow with a dark, crackling energy. He pointed his fingers at a fork lying on the table and unleashed the power. A surge of purple energy shot out, completely shattering the metal utensil and cracking the wall behind it. Seowoon grinned, ecstatic that he had actually learned a martial art. Jin Seowoon looked at the fork he had just embedded into the wall with a grin, thinking to himself that it was a nice start. As he walked through the house with his heavy crossbow, he considered that the presence of martial arts books surely meant that magic books existed in this world as well. Regardless of the fantasy elements, he felt certain that Cloyd Survival followed the same rules as Loyal Ground. After searching the rooms, he realized he had seen everything there was to see and decided it was time to move on to a new location. Night had fallen by the time he finished his initial farming session, and the small village was bathed in moonlight. He knew he needed to find a place to hide quickly. As he scanned the horizon, he noticed a single house in the distance with its lights still flickering, which stood out against the darkness. He reasoned that the light meant one of two things: either there was a rare item hidden inside, or someone was already occupying the space. He swallowed hard, considering the danger, but concluded that if anyone was there, they were either a complete professional or a total beginner. Creeping toward the building, he noted that the first floor seemed silent. He wondered if anyone was hiding on the second floor. He gripped his weapon tightly, telling himself that even if he faced a pro, he could stand a chance if he used an ambush combined with his Black Star Chi palms. He carefully ascended the stairs, every step feeling like a risk. When he reached the landing, he aimed his crossbow at a source of light, only to realize with a start that it was just a lantern sitting on a railing. He questioned if it was a trap, but his eyes soon landed on a closed door leading to another room. With a burst of adrenaline, he kicked the door open with a loud bang, sending it swinging on its hinges. He scanned the empty room frantically, his breath catching in his throat before he realized he had been putting on a dramatic show for absolutely no one. He let out a heavy sigh, leaning against the wall and feeling a wave of relief that the house was unoccupied. While exploring the room, he slid open a small drawer and found a glowing blue ring. He wondered if it was another item and was immediately greeted by a system notification. The Ring of Strength promised to increase the user's strength by 20 when equipped. Intrigued, he questioned if he could truly get stronger just by wearing a piece of jewelry. As he slid the ring onto his finger, a surge of power erupted from his hand, and he gasped in wonder. His body suddenly felt much lighter, and he noted that he could barely even feel the weight of his heavy crossbow anymore. He realized that a 20-point increase in strength was significant. He shouted for his stats, then tried calling for a character window or his info, and finally, a holographic screen popped up in front of him. Reading through his details, he admitted to himself that he looked pretty pathetic. He saw his name listed as Jin Seowoon, classified as a human martial artist with 30 strength, 15 stamina, 13 agility, and 5 magic resistance. He wondered if the system labeled him a martial artist simply because he had learned that one book. Despite his low stats, he thought the interface was pretty cool and acknowledged that he was far better off than when he started with nothing. He decided to head back downstairs to search the rest of the first floor properly. Tucked away in a corner, he found another piece of jewelry called a subspace ring, which allowed the user to store items in a pocket dimension. He marveled at the fact that he kept finding useful rings. The system explained that to store an item, he simply had to grab it and think the word subspace. Taking it out required touching the ring with his other hand while visualizing the object. It warned that he could not store anything else if the space was full. Seowoon likened it to a video game inventory and appreciated that people here use these instead of bulky bags. He decided to test it out by whispering the word subspace. A swirling purple portal appeared before him, making him shout in surprise as his item was sucked inside. The sensation felt strange to him, but he recognized the convenience of not having to carry a pack. He reflected on how amazing it would be to have such technology in the real world. Looking out at the moon, he thought about how incredible it would be to take these items and martial arts back home. Checking the interface, he looked for a kill log and saw that there had finally been one elimination. A man named James was listed as the first to fall, leaving 99 survivors. Seowoon had initially wanted to farm until only 90 people remained, but he felt he had gathered enough. Through his searching, he had obtained several consumable items and hidden weapons to complement his Black Star chi palms. He felt he had exhausted the resources in this area and debated whether he should move on now or wait until sunrise. He reminded himself that the powerful warriors he saw in the waiting room were likely already roaming the darkness, and he knew he couldn't beat them at his current level. However, he believed that if he could hide and make it into the top 10, he would be able to distribute his points effectively. He decided it was safer to move at night when fewer people were active and resolved to check one more place before morning. As he trekked through the dense, glowing woods, he was amazed that he didn't feel tired at all, giving credit to his new ring. His stomach soon began to growl, reminding him that despite his increased strength, he still suffered from hunger and thirst. He realized that this survival game was uncomfortably similar to reality in that regard. He complained about being hungry, noting that he didn't see anything edible nearby but hoped to find food in the city. He checked his map, seeing that houses should be in the vicinity, but he was interrupted by a low, guttural growl. He froze, a cold sweat breaking out as the sound echoed again. He realized he hadn't heard the creature approaching at all and turned to see a massive werewolf looming in the shadows. The beast lunged with a terrifying roar, and Seowoon barely managed to scramble out of the way, shouting in shock at the sudden attack. The werewolf snarled, its eyes glowing red as it prepared for another strike. Seowoon landed on the ground, panting heavily as he realized this wasn't just a player versus player game and that monsters were a real threat. He cursed his luck, thinking that if he had known about the monsters, he would have stayed inside. Despite his fear, his pride as a high-ranking gamer kicked in, and he told himself it would be embarrassing to die to a common mob. Spotting a small house nearby, he sprinted toward it and slammed the door shut just as the beast reached him. He collapsed against the wood, gasping for air as the werewolf growled persistently from the other side. He worried that the creature was following him and wondered what his next move should be. Peeking through a crack in the door, he watched the beast sniffing the ground and realized it was trying to track his scent. He decided that instead of waiting to be found, he would strike first. He carefully loaded his crossbow and aimed it through a hole in the wood. Waiting for the perfect moment, he pulled the trigger and watched as a bolt of blue energy streaked through the air. The projectile struck the werewolf with a loud crack, causing it to scream in pain. Seowoon cheered at the successful hit, noting that his ring allowed him to fire the heavy weapon with a single hand. He felt confident that he just had to deal with the remaining beast, but his heart stopped when he heard a second, much louder roar. A second werewolf smashed through the wall, catching him completely off guard. He struggled on the floor as the monster loomed over him, and he let out a desperate shout as he tried to keep the beast's claws away. For a moment, he wondered if this was how he would be eliminated from the game. However, he quickly shook off the despair, telling himself not yet. He activated his subspace ring with a shout, reaching into the portal to grab his weapon. With his hand glowing with dark energy, he unleashed his Black Star chi palms. He lunged forward and slammed his empowered fist into the werewolf's jaw. He vowed that he would not lose to a mere underling. Letting out a weary breath as the blue light of his attack faded, Jin Seowoon admitted to himself that he had truly thought he was a goner. He looked down at his feet, thanking his luck that he had stashed a throwing dagger earlier, as he realized he would have felt incredibly embarrassed if he had been eliminated by a mere group of mobs. His eyes were soon drawn to a glowing blue pouch on the ground, and he wondered if this was what people called a mob drop. Reaching into the bag, his excitement quickly turned to disappointment when he realized it only contained water and jerky. He complained that he could have just hunted for food on his own, but he took a bite anyway, wondering if he should begin checking the rest of the house's surroundings. On a nearby table, he discovered a sturdy piece of armor and questioned if it functioned similarly to a bulletproof vest in the game Loyal Ground. He tried to slide the heavy metal over his shoulders, noting at first that it seemed far too big for him, but he was startled to find that the plates shifted and tightened until they fit him perfectly. A system notification appeared, informing him that the advanced orichalcum breastplate had been equipped, greatly increasing his resistance against fire and wind magic. Seowoon beamed with joy, shouting that the item was awesome since it raised significantly more than just 1 or 2 basic stats. Convinced there was more to find, he continued his search, though he was initially frustrated when he found a room that appeared empty. Just as he was about to leave, his foot struck a faint blue outline on the floor. He reached down to touch the hidden item, noting that it felt like soft cloth. The system announced that the night cloak had been equipped, explaining that if he stayed still in the darkness, he would blend in perfectly with his surroundings. While hidden by the cloak, he would be undetectable by magic, and any sounds he made would be completely suppressed. Seowoon was thrilled, realizing this was a top-tier item that would allow him to avoid almost anyone at night. He felt confident that he could now stay alive as long as necessary and decided it was time to set out once more. Reflecting on his discovery, he realized that the house in the middle of nowhere was actually a prime farming spot and felt that his luck was already improving on his second day in this world. As he moved through the moonlit forest, he noted that he hadn't seen another soul yet, wondering if it was due to his random drop location. Suddenly, the sound of heavy breathing caught his attention. A panicked man sprinted through the trees, cursing his situation and lamenting that he hadn't had the time to use a certain item. The man growled that if he had used it, an apprentice bastard would have been nothing to him. Seowoon watched from the safety of his cloak, surprised to encounter a mage in the woods. Seeing the man's disheveled state, Seowoon judged that the stranger did not look particularly strong and decided that he could likely take care of him. He took aim with his crossbow, his hands trembling slightly as he wrestled with the realization that he was about to target a real person. He tried to tell himself that this was just a game, but he remained frozen until he finally scolded himself for hesitating, demanding that he just shoot. Before he could pull the trigger, a voice called out the name of a spell called Escrow's Flame. A massive wave of fire erupted from the shadows, engulfing the running man in a pillar of heat. The victim let out a horrific scream as he was burned alive, leaving Seowoon staring in shock. When the flames died down, only a treasure chest remained where the man had stood. Seowoon realized that because there was a chest instead of a corpse, the game mechanics were absolute. He assumed the chest contained the dead man's items but wondered where the lethal fire had come from. A man in long robes stepped into the clearing, clicking his tongue and mocking the deceased for daring to steal his items when he couldn't even use magic. Seowoon remained perfectly still, his heart racing as the mage called the fallen player an unlucky bastard. The mage noted that if the thief had simply died by his sword, he wouldn't have had to suffer the pain of burning to death. To Seowoon's amazement, the mage walked right past his hidden position without noticing a thing. Seowoon marveled at the power of his cloak but quickly realized that the player who died was just a normal person like himself. He feared that he could easily be the next person hunted by this powerful mage. His resolve hardened as he realized that the moment he hesitated, someone else would kill him to increase their own rank. If he wanted to survive, he had to act. The mage, identifying himself as Kairon, laughed with delight as he opened the chest, noting that the contents were quite nice. Just then, a bolt whizzed through the air, clanging loudly against a shimmering barrier that Kairon had raised at the last second. Kairon was stunned, realizing another player was nearby and cursed himself for making too much noise, blaming the previous thief for his current predicament. Seowoon quickly reloaded his weapon as Kairon's barrier began to crack under the pressure. The mage became increasingly desperate, shouting into the woods to ask if the attacker was over there. He unleashed a strike of magical energy that leveled a section of the forest, screaming for the coward to stop hiding and show themselves. Seowoon moved like a ghost, appearing behind the mage just as the barrier finally shattered. Kairon turned in a panic, trying to invoke Escrow's Flame one last time, but Seowoon was faster. He fired a bolt directly into the mage's head, silencing him mid-sentence. Standing over the fallen enemy, Seowoon whispered that he had won. He used his subspace ring to collect the 2 chests left behind, knowing that the fire would surely attract unwanted attention if he stayed too long. He decided to farm the rewards as quickly as possible and leave the area. Inside the mage's chest, he found a pair of gloves and a medium healing scroll, which he noted was a very good recovery item. He also pulled out a gold dragon necklace called Escrow's Necklace. The system described it as a symbol of a specific magic society, but Seowoon dismissed it as a trash item with no special properties and stashed it away. His eyes then landed on a strange stone sphere. The system identified it as a circle stone, an item that would allow him to engrave a mana circle around his heart. Seowoon was floored by the realization that he could become a mage so easily. He remembered the man who was running earlier saying he hadn't had time to use his item and realized the stone was what he had been carrying. With a smirk, Seowoon apologized to the dead man but promised to put the stone to good use in his stead. He gathered the rest of his loot and went searching for a safe place to undergo the transformation. Finding a quiet stone building at dawn, he sat down and activated the circle stone. The system warned him that he would be motionless for 3 hours and would be unable to take any other actions or use items. It also mentioned he might feel a slight pain. As soon as the process began, Seowoon let out a choked scream of agony, clutching his chest as his body was flooded with power. He suppressed the urge to cry out and endured 3 hours of intense suffering. When the time finally passed, he collapsed on the floor, panting and sweating as he complained that the system's definition of slight pain was a complete lie. He noted that while learning martial arts was simple, magic was a different beast entirely. He called out for his status window and was pleased to see his job was now listed as both a martial artist and a mage, with his mana and vitality stats significantly increased. He then checked the number of survivors, expecting it to have dropped by 2. He was horrified to see that the count had plummeted to 45 out of 100. He looked at the kill log in disbelief, seeing a single name repeated over and over again. A player named Nam Sagwang had been slaughtering everyone in his path. Hours earlier, deep in the forest, a man had been running for his life, begging his pursuer to stop chasing him. A young man with messy hair and a cruel expression had simply smiled as he followed. The fleeing man tripped, falling into the dirt and pleading to just let him reach the top 90. He begged for his life, crying out that he couldn't be eliminated like this. Nam Sagwang had ignored the pleas, placing a hand on the man's head and ending his life with a burst of cold power. As blood splattered the trees, Nam Sagwang had noted that now all the participants would finally know his name. On the 3rd day of Cloyd Survival, Jin Seowoon stared at his interface in utter disbelief, realizing that 54 people had been killed in a single night. He traced the name Nam Sagwang on the floating screen, noting the long list of victims associated with him and praying that he would never run into such a person. However, a new thought entered his mind. If the participants continued to die at this rate, it might actually be possible for him to end up in the top 10 survivors. He remembered that the system had announced special rewards for those who reached the highest rankings and wondered what they could be. While he initially guessed money or items, he began to speculate if he might be able to use the skills and items he acquired here back in his own world. He quickly dismissed the thought, telling himself that with a killer running amok outside, he was getting ahead of himself. Standing in the sunlight of a small stone room, he knew he needed to finish up his preparations and start moving soon. He held out his hand and watched as blue energy flickered around his fingers, feeling a strange power coming from within and wondering if this was truly mana. He remembered finding a magic book while looting the previous day and pulled the glowing purple volume from his subspace. The item was identified as a magic book of wind ball, which allowed the user to create spheres of wind that increased in number based on their power. Knowing he had to strengthen himself, he reached out and pressed the yes button on the holographic prompt. A surge of blue light enveloped his body, and he felt the knowledge of the magic spell being imprinted directly into his mind. He took a deep breath and called out the name of the creator, Escrow, followed by the command for Magic Wind Ball. 3 swirling spheres of azure energy manifested around his hand, and he looked at them with a skeptical expression, wondering if this was all there was to the spell. He flicked his wrist, sending the orbs flying toward a stone wall. The impact was far greater than he expected, as the wind balls shattered the masonry and wood with a loud explosion. He realized the spell was much stronger than it looked and would definitely come in handy. Suddenly, a wave of exhaustion hit him, and he checked his status only to find that his mana had dropped to 0 out of 30. He realized that using magic was incredibly taxing on his energy. As time passed, a restricted zone began to appear on the map, and the playable boundary gradually shrank. Seowoon decided to continue farming while staying at the very edges of the boundary to remain safe. He calculated that his chances of running into another player should be lower now that half of them were gone, but he knew he had to hurry before the zone shrank even more. Unbeknownst to him, a mysterious elder with long white hair and a flowing beard was perched on a tree branch, watching his every move. The old man whispered that the boy was quite interesting before vanishing into the leaves with a swift movement. Half a day later, Seowoon reached a deserted town, remembering that he had seen houses marked on the map in this area. He paused as he saw empty treasure chests and bloodstains on the ground, his senses tingling. Sensing a presence, he spun around and unleashed a wind ball strike into the mist. The energy exploded against a wall, but he saw nothing but shadows and wondered if it had just been the wind or if he had truly felt someone there. Seowoon considered that anyone who had managed to survive this long must be strong and pondered if he should kill the man while he was vulnerable to claim his items. Ultimately, he decided to prioritize his own survival and walked away, choosing to leave the potential target alone. Inside the building, the armored warrior let out a sigh of relief, thanking God that he had been quick enough to hide. He scoffed, thinking he would have taken care of Seowoon easily if he weren't already injured, but as he reached for a nearby chest, a sudden flash of red light signaled his end. Back in the bushes, Seowoon was preparing to move toward the edge of the restricted zone when a voice suddenly spoke, telling him he seemed pretty skilled. Seowoon gasped, his heart racing as he realized he had completely let his guard down. He turned to find the white-haired elder standing right behind him. The old man told him there was no need to be so scared and explained he just wanted to ask a few questions. Seowoon stammered, asking who the man was, but the elder replied that Seowoon wouldn't know even if he told him his name. He noted that they all came from different lives and asked if the boy had participated in this kind of play before. Seowoon was confused by the word play, but the elder explained he had been watching for a while and noticed how fast Seowoon had adapted to the reality of the situation. Seowoon wondered how long he had been watched and admitted that while it was his first time being brought here, he had played a similar game in the world he came from. The elder found it interesting that a game could be similar to this survival and concluded from Seowoon's appearance that they were not from the same world. As night fell, the elder looked at the sky and asked if the moon in Seowoon's world was as big as the one above them. Seowoon realized he hadn't noticed the moon's size and confirmed that the one here was much larger. The elder then asked Seowoon to explain the game he had mentioned, but suggested they move to a safer place since they could easily be ambushed where they were. Seowoon hesitated, wondering how he could trust that the man wouldn't kill him. Before he could finish his thought, the elder grabbed him by the back of his cloak and leapt high into the air, telling him to stay quiet if he didn't want to become a target. They landed on a massive branch of a giant tree bathed in moonlight. The elder found the concept of playing in a virtual space with dolls fascinating and remarked that Seowoon's world sounded like a magical place. Seowoon struggled to explain the concept of a highly advanced civilization, which the elder used to justify how the boy had adjusted so quickly. Seowoon asked again how long he had been watched, and the man revealed he had been there since the moment they were dropped into the world. The elder confessed he had originally planned to spend 100 days enjoying the fresh air in the mountains but was intrigued by Seowoon's actions. He assured the boy he had no intent to harm him and was simply curious. Seowoon admitted he didn't know why they were brought there either and explained that back home, games were just for fun and didn't result in real death. The elder mused that while the motives of the supernatural beings were unknown, the game served as a huge opportunity. He believed that upon death, participants would be ranked and given rewards, including the skills and martial arts they had learned. Seowoon looked at his gear, asking if he meant the items on his body. The elder confirmed this, adding that these abilities could change the lives of people who were struggling. He pointed out that Seowoon didn't seem like a martial arts master with followers, but rather someone who didn't have much use in his own world. Seowoon laughed, telling the man to lower his voice and asking why he assumed his life was without struggles. The elder laughed along, finding the young man interesting. He then asked what Seowoon was doing earlier when he was hovering his fingers in the air, and Seowoon realized the man didn't know how to access the map. As Seowoon shared tips and tricks about the interface and heard stories of the elder's world, morning arrived quickly. The elder expressed regret for taking up too much time, but Seowoon assured him it was fine, thinking that staying with this powerful master was the best way to remain safe. The elder asked if there was anything he could do to repay him for the help. Seowoon took the chance, asking if he could learn some of the man's martial arts to help him survive. The elder smiled, saying it wasn't impossible, but warned that Seowoon must be prepared for the worst. When asked what that meant, the elder looked him in the eye and said he meant death. He then asked Seowoon what his choice would be. The elder clarified that the price for succeeding outside traditional means was death, and he asked if the boy was truly prepared for such a fate. Seowoon hesitated for a moment before pointing out that according to the rules of this world, people didn't actually die here. The elder paused, his eyes widening as he realized the boy was right. Strokes of his beard followed as he mused that if death was off the table, then using his specialized method could actually be possible. Seowoon became excited, asking if there was truly a way for him to get stronger, and the elder confirmed it would be worth a try. First, the old man reached out to gauge how much inner energy Seowoon possessed. Seowoon was confused, but the elder's expression quickly turned to one of pure shock. He exclaimed that Seowoon's inner energy was quite literally less than that of his house dog, wondering how such a thing was even possible. Seowoon reminded him that in his home world, things like martial arts and inner energy simply did not exist. Accepting this, the elder commanded the boy to sit in the lotus position. As Seowoon complied, the master placed a firm hand on the boy's head and began to channel a massive amount of power. He warned Seowoon that he was about to experience pain akin to death, yet his body would be unable to move an inch. Trembling with fear, Seowoon asked what he was supposed to do, and the elder gave a simple, cold instruction to endure it, warning that failure would mean the end of his life. Suddenly, a violent surge of energy erupted around them. Seowoon felt as if all of his senses were being pushed to their absolute limits. The wind blowing against his skin felt like sharp, cold blades, and every breath he pulled into his lungs felt like molten lava. His perception became so sharp that he could even hear the sound of ants crawling through the grass beneath him. As a brilliant flash of blue light consumed his vision, he felt a crushing pressure and wondered if he was actually going to die. After what felt like an eternity, the energy subsided and the elder declared that the process was finished. Seowoon sat slumped over, drenched in sweat and gasping for air, before he eventually doubled over and vomited onto the grass. The elder observed him calmly, noting that since he had endured the trial, it proved his body was not bad and that he possessed an innate disposition for greatness. He explained that he had fixed the flow of the boy's chi, which would make his body feel different than before. Seowoon, still wiping his mouth, asked what his next step should be. The elder, seeing the boy's determination to get strong as quickly as possible, explained that he had pushed Seowoon's soul aside to create an inspiratory gate in that space. The master began a lesson, explaining that humans were composed of a body, mind, and soul, all held together by a force called life chi. He asked Seowoon what he thought happened to that life chi when a person died. Seowoon guessed that it simply disappeared, but the elder corrected him, stating that it actually dispersed and was absorbed back into nature to allow the life cycle to continue. He revealed that there were those who considered this natural cycle a waste and would commit murder specifically to absorb the life chi of others. However, those who did so often found their bodies in an unstable state, as the harmony of their internal energies would shatter, leading to death or the loss of their martial arts. The elder explained that the mind technique he had passed on allowed Seowoon to absorb scattered life chi to increase his inner energy without those risks. Seowoon was startled, realizing that if he messed up, he might really die, but the elder reassured him that he was different. Since Seowoon had no previous inner energy, he was like a blank sheet of paper, allowing the elder to tweak his veins so he could absorb life chi harmoniously. The master asked if the boy understood why he had granted him a technique that was strictly forbidden in his home of Zhongyuan. Seowoon realized it was because of the unique setting of this game, and the elder smiled, pleased that the boy was quick to catch on. The elder mentioned that he had sensed life chi left behind in places where people had died recently. He noted that the biggest drawback of this technique was that success usually required murder, but in this world, that was no longer an issue. He predicted that by the end of the 100 days, Seowoon would reach an incredible level of power. Stating that it was time for them to part ways, the elder expressed his hope to see the boy again. Seowoon hurriedly asked for the man's name, and the master identified himself as Jing Uchun, a man known to many as the Deep Valley Standing Kingly. He named the technique he had taught as the White Martial Physique Arts and gave one final piece of advice. Seowoon needed to get used to breathing deeply and accumulating inner energy in his dantian to grow stronger. The elder marveled at the convenience of the map feature Seowoon had shown him before promising to meet again when the opportunity arose. With a swift movement, Jing Uchun vanished into the trees like a seasoned professional. Seowoon stood alone, watching the swirling energy around him and wishing he had also learned the art of Qigong so he could move as comfortably as the master. He decided to stick to his original plan and move toward the outskirts of the limited area. However, the journey on foot took much longer than expected, lasting half a day as he realized the map was far larger than he had initially thought. By nightfall, he arrived at another village and noticed a house with its lantern still lit. He reasoned that it was either empty or occupied by a total amateur who didn't know how to hide their presence, and he decided to make it his target for the night. He moved through the shadows with his crossbow at the ready, eventually slipping into the house. He was disappointed to find only small healing scrolls and jerky, complaining that he had come all this way for nothing. Exhausted from his long conversation with the elder and his trek across the map, he decided he needed to get some sleep. On the 5th day of Cloyd Survival, Seowoon woke up to find the sun already high in the sky. He cursed himself for sleeping like a baby, but his internal monologue was cut short when he heard the door creak open. A man with a mustache and light armor walked in, sighing about how he could finally rest. Seowoon remained hidden, aiming his crossbow through the shadows. The intruder, Shui Oring, caught a glimpse of movement and was immediately met by a bolt. He dodged the lethal projectile and lunged at Seowoon with his sword, clicking his tongue and calling a martial artist annoying. Seowoon didn't hesitate, dropping his crossbow and activating his Black Star Chi Palm. A wave of dark energy clashed with the sword, and the intruder grunted in frustration, calling Seowoon a lowly bastard for using hidden weapons. Seowoon ignored the insults, delivering a powerful kick that sent the man crashing to the floor. Standing over the defeated warrior, Seowoon remarked that he had been having a nice dream until he was woken up. Shui Oring began to plead for his life, promising to give Seowoon everything he had and crying out that he had struggled too hard to survive to die now. A system notification flashed, confirming that Jin Seowoon had eliminated Shui Oring with a headshot. Blood spattered across Seowoon's face as he looked down at the dead man and coldly stated that he couldn't afford to die here either. Staring at his blood-stained hands, Jin Seowoon watched in silence as a faint green light began to swirl around the body of the man he had just killed. He recalled the words of Elder Jing Uchin, realizing that this mystical glow was the dispersed life chi that had been mentioned. As the energy flowed from the fallen warrior and into his own palm, Seowoon wondered if this was the sensation of vitality being absorbed. He watched as the light permeated his skin, causing his entire being to radiate with a vibrant green aura. He gasped as he felt a sudden rush of power overflowing within him, questioning if this was truly the experience of gaining internal energy. Even though he had only absorbed the life force of a single person, his body felt incredibly light and a sense of absolute power surged through his veins. Hurriedly calling out for his information window, Seowoon examined his updated stats. His race remained human, and his traits were now officially listed as both martial artist and magician. To his delight, his internal energy had reached 20, while his mana remained at 30. He noted with a smirk that the person he had just eliminated must have possessed exactly 20 points of internal energy. He whispered his thanks to the elder, realizing the old man had given him something far more amazing than he had ever expected. He resolved that even if he couldn't secure another kill soon, he absolutely had to find a way to gather more vitality to increase his strength. As the sun set behind the distant mountains, Seowoon checked the survivor count and was startled to see only 24 people remaining out of the original 100. He couldn't believe so many had fallen in just 5 days. Suddenly, a new notification chimed on his interface, announcing that Nam Sagwang had eliminated another player named Cal Verstappen with a martial arts strike. The number dropped instantly to 23. Far across the ruins, the perpetrator of the massacre, Nam Sagwang, stood over a glowing treasure chest. He looked at the remains of his opponent, noting that the man had attacked first and had seemed like a formidable opponent. However, the youth wiped blood from his face, complaining that he had ultimately dirtied his hands for absolutely nothing. Nam Sagwang sighed, wondering when this endless cycle of death was finally going to end. He pulled up the survivor list and noted with a bored expression that there were still 22 others left. His eyes narrowed as he spotted a specific name on the log, Jin Seowoon. He muttered the name to himself, feeling as though he had seen that bastard's name somewhere before. Back in his own hiding spot, Seowoon looked at the same log and realized that Nam Sagwang was likely the person with the highest kill count in the entire game. He decided right then and there that he absolutely had to avoid that guy at all costs. Reflecting on his recent fight, he admitted that he had barely managed to win against a relatively weak opponent, and he knew he was nowhere near the level of someone like Nam Sagwang. He decided that before the restricted area could shrink any further, he needed to hurry up and farm more items before getting out of the danger zone. Searching through the house of the man he had killed, he found a chest containing a refined troll potion, but there was nothing else of value to be found. He mused that if his victims had actually possessed any rare items or powerful elixirs, they wouldn't have lost to him so easily. With the map closing in, Seowoon decided to spend the next week camping in the wilderness, waiting for the number of survivors to decrease as much as possible. 1 week later, on the 12th day of the survival game, Seowoon crouched in the dense forest. A massive wolf with glowing red eyes snarled at him from the shadows, but Seowoon was no longer the panicked beginner he had been. He unleashed a focused bolt of energy that tore through the beast with a brilliant flash of light. He remarked that the creature would serve as his meal for the day, though he admitted he was becoming incredibly sick of eating jerky. He moved cautiously through the outskirts of the restricted zone, noting that he hadn't encountered any human enemies recently. He reached out to touch the shimmering hexagonal boundary of the restricted zone, pulling his hand back as a numb sensation washed over his fingers. He realized that if he stepped outside those lines, he wouldn't even be able to move. Checking the log, he saw that there were now only 20 survivors left. For the past week, the kill log had been dominated almost entirely by Nam Sagwang's kills. Everyone else seemed to be playing with extreme caution, and even the top killer appeared to be hiding somewhere for the moment. Suddenly, Seowoon's attention was drawn to a massive pillar of smoke and light rising from a distant part of the city. He watched the horizon, noting that a significant battle seemed to be taking place. In a large clearing, Nam Sagwang stood surrounded by a group of heavily armed players. A man in a full suit of knightly armor told the youth that they had all gathered with the common goal of taking him down. The knight declared that Nam Sagwang had no chance of winning and ordered him to simply die peacefully. The group consisted of a diverse array of warriors, including a woman in white robes and several swordsmen. Nam Sagwang laughed at them, asking if they really thought they could catch a single kid by rushing him in a mob. He mockingly expressed his gratitude, stating that they had saved him the trouble of having to track each of them down individually. The youth's expression turned lethal as he asked if they were at least prepared to die themselves. He promised to make them understand their mistake properly before he blurred into motion. With a single, brutal strike, he grabbed the head of the nearest warrior and crushed it with a burst of energy. He shouted out the number 1 as blood and magical fragments filled the air. The other players were frozen in horror, unable to comprehend how he had killed a high-level participant in just one strike. Nam Sagwang didn't stop, turning his cold gaze toward the next target and announcing that it was time for number 2. The scene was no longer a battle. The narrator described it as an act of indiscriminate slaughter. Seowoon watched his interface as notification after notification flooded the screen. Nam Sagwang eliminated Peter Lawrence, Samuel, Charles Maxon, Elizabeth, Ao Zhan, and Eren in rapid succession. Seowoon called the boy a real lunatic, wondering if he was somehow hacking the game to achieve 9 kills in such a short window of time. Back at the site of the carnage, Nam Sagwang panted slightly, calling the group a bunch of nobodies. He complained that the smell of blood was becoming too sticky and wondered why they had struggled so hard instead of dying cleanly. He looked at the discarded weapons and chests littering the ground, deciding he should find a valley or a stream to wash himself. As he walked away, another figure approached the site of the massacre. The elven mage from the beginning of the game, Escrow, picked up a shattered wooden staff. He recognized it as Elizabeth's staff and his face twisted with grief and rage. He whispered a promise to the fallen woman, swearing on his own name that he would definitely avenge her. By nightfall, only 11 survivors remained. Seowoon sat in the trees, realizing that to survive against a monster like Nam Sagwang, he desperately needed more reliable items. He spotted a grand mansion in the distance, theorizing that the building would likely be outside the restricted area by the following morning. He decided it was the last point where he could properly farm for high-level gear. He slipped inside the mansion and was immediately awestruck by its grand, blue-lit halls and massive statues. His luck seemed to turn when he found a set of Royal Guard armor, but he was frustrated to see that he needed a strength stat of 110 to equip it. Since his strength was only 30, he realized the heavy metal would just be useless baggage and moved on. He searched the shelves until he found a glowing blue vial called an Elixir of Insight, which promised to increase his internal energy. He cheered, realizing that with this elixir, he might not have to rely on killing others to absorb vitality. The mansion proved to be a treasure trove as he also acquired a manual titled Secrets of the Unbreakable Fist. He was ecstatic to have found both an elixir and a new martial arts manual in one place. He knew that, like the Circle Stone, he would need to hide for 3 hours to use these items safely. He spotted a heavy door leading to an underground warehouse and moved toward it, but he was suddenly interrupted by a massive explosion that ripped through the mansion. Seowoon was thrown through the air, shouting in shock as flames and debris filled the hall. He scrambled into a pile of autumn leaves outside, his heart pounding as he realized he had been followed despite his cloak. As he looked up through the smoke, his eyes widened in recognition. Standing amidst the fire was the elven mage he had seen in the waiting room. Escrow looked down at him, impressed that the boy had survived his explosion. The mage noted that Seowoon must not have survived and killed all those people by sheer luck. Seowoon was confused, but he realized the mage wasn't talking to him. Emerging from the flames behind the mage was Nam Sagwang. The youth looked at Escrow with a bored expression, asking what the hell he was saying. Nam Sagwang told the mage that if he just shut his muttering mouth, he was nothing special. He warned Escrow to hurry up and attack because his time was precious. The mage grinned wickedly, telling the boy to see how long he could keep flapping his mouth. Nam Sagwang's eyes turned yellow and predatory as he told the mage that his tongue was way too long. Seowoon remained hidden in the bushes, sweating as he realized the legendary killer who had caused so much trouble was actually just a young kid. The battlefield erupted in flames as Escrow towered over his opponent, calling him a brat and expressing his desire to see how much longer the boy could keep running his mouth. From his hiding spot in the bushes, Jin Seowoon watched the terrifying display of power with wide eyes. Escrow raised his staff high, invoking his authority as the master of spells and commanding a strike of Escrow-style lightning to rain down from the sky. A massive bolt of blue energy tore through the air, crashing into the stone ground where Nam Sagwang stood. The boy moved like a shadow, dodging the lethal current as Escrow yelled, asking how much longer he intended to keep dodging like that. The Archmage demanded that Nam Sagwang face him head-on, just as he had done against the fallen Elizabeth. As Nam Sagwang avoided another burst of crackling energy, he realized that the mage was not just all talk. He admitted to himself that he had never seen anyone like Escrow before, even in the legendary lands of Zhongyuan, and confessed that some of the man's skills truly sent a shiver down his spine. Escrow's face twisted in rage, calling his opponent a rat bastard and swearing to end him right then and there with a final strike. He unleashed a devastating lightning storm that turned the entire environment into a chaotic web of electricity. Nam Sagwang's eyes widened as the bolts closed in, but he refused to stay on the defensive. He lunged forward, closing the distance as Escrow noted that a simple dash would not be enough to break through his magical barrier. Escrow commanded the boy to just die already, but he was stunned when the youth's body seemed to blur and vanish. The mage realized too late that Nam Sagwang had successfully cast an illusion to deceive him. The sky darkened further as rain began to fall in heavy sheets. Watching from the brush, Seowoon marveled at the sudden change in weather, wondering if it was happening because of the mage's magic. He concluded that the man was crazy strong for nearly killing Nam Sagwang while also possessing the power to change the atmosphere. Escrow sighed as he looked around the clearing, admitting he could no longer detect his target and assuming Nam Sagwang had fled quite far away. He let out a frustrated roar into the storm, swearing by his name that he would eventually catch and kill the youth. Meanwhile, Nam Sagwang was panting heavily in another part of the forest, acknowledging that while the mage bastard had defeated him this time, he would not let him walk away unharmed in their next encounter. He vowed to be the one to right Escrow's death before deciding to fall back and recover. Seowoon watched as the mage eventually gave up his search and disappeared into the night. He felt a wave of relief, realizing that thanks to his cloak of hiding, he had remained unseen and lived to see another day. He reflected on the old saying that it was always darkest under the lamp, guessing that both Escrow and Nam Sagwang wouldn't return to this location for a while. Moving through the wet undergrowth, Seowoon stumbled upon a wooden trapdoor hidden in the ground and felt a surge of excitement. He wondered if it was a safe containing important items or perhaps a dungeon hiding a treasure within. He carefully pulled the door open and noted that the staircase looked pretty deep. He decided to head inside for the time being, glad that it didn't look like anyone else had discovered the spot yet. Carrying a lantern he had grabbed while farming the previous day, he descended the stone steps until he found himself in a room filled with barrels and hanging meats. He initially feared it was a complete bust if the room was just a food cellar, but then his stomach let out a loud growl. He realized he had only eaten tasteless jerky since he arrived in this world. 1 hour later, Seowoon sat against a wall surrounded by empty plates, admitting the meal was good but wishing he had some white rice to make it perfect. He decided it was finally time to consume the elixir he had found, but he also pulled out his new martial arts manual. The system identified it as a manual for the unrestrained fist, a technique developed by a man named Manhwa in his later years. Seowoon read with a deadpan expression that the creator had a record of over 1,400 losses and had lived his life as a laughingstock, resulting in the art being lost due to a lack of disciples. He figured it was probably still better than learning nothing at all, but decided to prioritize the elixir first. He hesitated for a moment, remembering the extreme pain he had experienced while activating the circle stone, but his desire to get stronger pushed him forward. He swallowed the liquid without further thought, and immediately, his dantian began to fill with inner energy that far surpassed the vitality he had absorbed earlier. He began to sweat profusely, and his movements became heavy and dull, confirming the system's warning that he would be unable to move for 3 hours. When the time finally passed, he sat up with a weary groan, noting that even staying still for so long was exhausting. He felt proud of the fact that he had survived a week in the forest unnoticed while the Archmage and Nam Sagwang fought. As the 13th day of the survival game dawned, Seowoon emerged from the cellar and saw that the restricted zone was pressing right against the ruins. He checked the player count and was stunned to see only 10 survivors remained. Checking the log, his eyes widened in shock as he saw that the elder, Jang Dochian, had apparently committed suicide. Seowoon was baffled, wondering if the man had tried some absurd training method because he knew there was no risk of real death. Though he was happy to have made it to the top 10, reaching the goal in this manner left a bad taste in his mouth. He noticed the boundary shrinking even further and realized he couldn't afford to die from being caught in the zone after coming this far. He sprinted through the woods, resolving to stick with the stealth strategy that had kept him alive. Suddenly, a massive fireball exploded directly in his path, throwing him to the ground and filling the air with smoke. He scrambled back, wondering where such a large attack had come from, until a silhouette appeared through the trees. It was Escrow. The mage explained that he had sensed someone through his detection spell and had assumed it was Nam Sagwang, but noted it was a new face he was seeing. Seowoon realized his mistake, regretting that he had been so caught up in his newfound internal energy that he had run straight into a monster. Escrow turned his cold gaze toward the boy and asked if he perhaps knew where Nam Sagwang was, warning that if he didn't, he would have to kill Seowoon right there. Nam Sagwang smirked from the shadows as the confrontation began. Staring down at the cornered youth, Escrow gripped his staff tightly and declared that the only way for the boy to live was to reveal the location of Nam Sagwang. He warned that if the boy did not know, he would have no choice but to kill him, as keeping him alive was nothing more than a nuisance. Jin Seowoon was taken aback, asking what the mage was even talking about the moment they met and questioning how he could possibly know such a thing. Before he could say another word, a massive explosion erupted in the distance, and Seowoon watched in awe as a figure plummeted from the sky. Escrow looked up, noting that the boy appeared to be from the same world as the previous players he had faced, and told him that if he refused to talk, he should simply die. Suddenly, Nam Sagwang lunged from the shadows, striking the archmage with a forceful blow. Escrow staggered, realizing the boy had been hiding nearby the entire time. Nam Sagwang wore a wicked grin, stating that he was already fully recovered and asked the mage if he was running low on mana. From his vantage point, Seowoon wondered where Nam Sagwang had suddenly appeared from, his heart racing. Nam Sagwang declared that he would end the confrontation right then and there, launching himself at his opponent. Escrow remained confident, believing that such a simple physical attack could not possibly damage a mage of his caliber. However, his eyes widened in shock as blood splattered across his face from a deep wound. Nam Sagwang's smile widened as he asked if the archmage had ever heard of the concept of Gangi. He explained that among those techniques, Sugong was a martial art that only a rare few had truly mastered. The youth confessed he had not expected to be forced to use such a high-level skill in this world, but told Escrow it was an honor for the archmage to be the first to witness it. Nam Sagwang grabbed the mage's head, ignoring his agonized groans, and delivered a brutal series of strikes that caused blood to spray into the air. Escrow let out a horrific scream as his body was mangled, and Nam Sagwang noted that the mage would no longer be able to cast those annoying spells of his. The archmage could only choke on his own blood as Nam Sagwang observed that someone of his talent could have easily been in the top 5 survivors. He coldly told the falling man to regret ever meeting him. Seowoon watched the slaughter from a distance, wondering if he should consider Nam Sagwang showing up as lucky for him. He realized that while the two were occupied with each other, he needed to get out of the area as quickly as possible. He watched the archmage, who seemed like he would never lose, fall so miserably to the young killer. A dark thought suddenly struck Seowoon, overshadowing both his fear of the boy and his pity for the mage. He wondered how much stronger he could become if he managed to absorb the life force of both of these powerful beings. He swallowed hard as Nam Sagwang stood over the broken body of his enemy, mocking him for becoming a half-corpse after being so confident the day before. The youth asked for any last words before he finished the job, then laughed as he realized Escrow could no longer speak because of his injuries. Inside his mind, Escrow reflected on Elizabeth, the one Nam Sagwang had killed, calling her his most cherished disciple. Nam Sagwang paused, asking what the man was talking about inside his head. The archmage's thoughts continued, explaining how that child had not been recognized by the academic society and was kicked out of the university just because she was a girl. He lamented that he had regretted not stopping her over and over again. Nam Sagwang laughed at the sentiment, stating that if it was a girl, there was no way he wouldn't have noticed, suggesting she must have looked no different from a man. Escrow's blood-streaked face twisted into a final, vengeful smile as he vowed to shut the boy's filthy mouth once and for all. Seowoon sensed a shift in the air, shouting for the participants to hold on as a massive, burning light appeared in the sky. He looked up in terror, asking what it was as a giant meteor began its descent toward the mansion. The archmage had unleashed his final spell, Armageddon, which a mage could only cast in exchange for their remaining mana and their very life force. Nam Sagwang looked up in a panic, realizing the man couldn't cast normal spells and wondering how he had managed to summon such a catastrophe. He called Escrow a crazy bastard as the world turned to fire. Seowoon cursed his own hesitation, wishing he had run away much sooner. In his final moments, Escrow whispered to Elizabeth that it was good to see her again after so long and expressed his hope that they would meet in another life. A treasure chest appeared where the mage had stood as a colossal explosion leveled the surrounding area. Seowoon was buried under the rubble, groaning as he struggled to move. He cursed, realizing he should have fled faster and that his obsession with the life force had nearly cost him his life. He reached into his subspace, desperately searching for the healing scrolls he had farmed for times like these. He tore one open with his teeth, declaring that he couldn't die so pathetically. He crawled through the debris, noting that he had barely made it out alive and wouldn't have escaped at all if he hadn't taken that elixir earlier. Despite the healing, he screamed in pain, realizing that one scroll was nowhere near enough to mend his broken body. After using up every single scroll he had saved, he finally managed to breathe a bit easier, though he was exhausted. He looked at his interface as a notification chimed, announcing that Nam Sagwang had officially eliminated Escrow. He felt a pang of regret that he hadn't been able to absorb the Archmage's life force, but then he noticed something strange. There was no log entry for Nam Sagwang's death. He wondered if the kid was somehow still alive. Suddenly, a weak, trembling voice whispered for someone to save them. Seowoon followed the sound through the dense trees until he found a horrific sight. Nam Sagwang lay mangled on the ground, both of his arms missing and his body covered in burns. The kid begged for the person nearby to just tear a healing scroll for him, crying out that he couldn't die like this. Seowoon stepped into the light, confirming that this was indeed Nam Sagwang. He told the boy that every time his name showed up in the kill log, he had wondered what kind of items he had to be so strong. He admitted he had truly believed the kid would win the game and was surprised to see him end up in this state. Nam Sagwang pleaded for help, promising to make Seowoon the winner if he helped him just this once, claiming that making someone a winner was easy for him. Seowoon ignored the offer, pulling a dagger from his subspace. He mused that if he could get Nam Sagwang's items and his life force, he would truly become the Lu Bu of this survival game. Nam Sagwang screamed no, telling him he didn't know how many strong bastards were still out there and claiming he didn't even have many items because his martial arts weren't learned in this world. Seowoon smiled coldly, telling the boy he should at least know the name of the person who was killing him. He identified himself as Jin Seowoon. Nam Sagwang let out a final, defiant roar, vowing that he might die this time but he would never forget the name Jin Seowoon. Seowoon thrust the dagger down, ending the boy's life with a single, sharp movement. He let out a long breath, feeling a moment of guilt because the legendary killer looked so much like a simple kid. However, that feeling vanished as a massive flood of green light erupted from the body. Seowoon was stunned by the incredible amount of life force flowing into him, realizing that Nam Sagwang was practically a human elixir. An immense amount of internal energy began to surge within his body, and he laughed with newfound power. A notification appeared on his screen, showing that the survivor count had dropped to 8 out of 100. High above in a nearby tree, another player with long white hair and pointed ears watched the scene, gripping a golden sword. He noted that now that the tiger was dead, the foxes would surely run rampant. Looking at his hands radiating with vibrant green light, Jin Seowoon marveled at the enormous amount of inner energy he had just obtained from the fallen killer. He believed that with this much power, he might finally be able to face anyone who dared to cross his path. He turned his attention to Nam Sagwang's treasure chest, deciding to check out the drops left behind. He reflected that if the boy had this much inner energy from the very start, he must have been someone truly insane. He reasoned that there was no way the kid had chosen not to farm because of that, and he hoped to find something high quality to keep his mood from being ruined. As he pried the chest open, a brilliant green light filled the clearing, and he let out a gasp of surprise at what lay within. He was stunned to find a collection of powerful artifacts, identifying Kaiser's ring which promised to raise his agility greatly, followed by Drimminger's ring for a massive strength boost, and Galen's ring to increase his stamina. He also pulled out 2 of Tokar's rings, both of which provided a significant increase to his magic resistance. Seowoon realized that the bastard had exclusively farmed rare items, and he felt a surge of adrenaline as he realized the boy had been acting like he wasn't overgeared the whole time. Curious about his current level, he called out for his status window, and the holographic screen materialized before him. He stared in awe at the updated numbers, seeing his strength and stamina had both jumped to 70, his agility to 75, and his magic resistance to a staggering 90. With such incredible stats, he felt certain that he could definitely win the game now. Aside from the rings, the chest contained a variety of martial arts manuals, but he quickly realized they were all things he couldn't learn right away because they required prerequisites he had yet to master. He paused mid-thought, suddenly sensing someone's presence nearby. Before he could react, a voice shouted the command for escrow-style fire, and a massive fire strike engulfed him in a violent explosion. As the flames subsided, a man in a long coat and holding a staff stood in the clearing, calling Seowoon a bastard and warning him that he shouldn't let his guard down just because he was busy farming. The man noted that since Seowoon fell for such a simple level of ambush, it looked like he had just been lucky in killing Nam Sagwon. Seowoon stood up slowly, appearing completely unharmed, and asked the man who he was. The attacker was stunned, wondering how his fire spell hadn't done anything to the boy. Seowoon noticed a faint flash from his interface, seeing that his magic resistance of 90 was doing its job perfectly. He began walking calmly toward the mage, whose voice began to tremble as he told Seowoon to stay back and asked what he was planning to do. The man warned that if he took one more step, he would hit him with a much stronger spell. He gathered his energy, shouting for escrow-style flames and unleashing a massive ball of fire. Seowoon remained unfazed, doubting that the attack would do anything to him at this point. As the explosion rocked the ground, Seowoon stepped through the smoke and invoked the first chapter of the Unrestrained Fist, calling out a piercing fist strike. His hand glowed with blue energy as he drove his fist into the mage's chest, a powerful shockwave sending the man flying. Seowoon was surprised by the result, noting that while he had heard a martial art that always lost shouldn't inspire high expectations, the strength actually varied based on how much inner energy the user possessed. The mage, whose name was Ziark, coughed up blood as he collapsed against a tree. A notification chimed, announcing that Jin Seowoon had eliminated Ziark with a fist art, and the survivor count dropped to 7. Seowoon realized that with his higher magic resistance, average spells wouldn't even leave a scratch on him. He pulled up his hood, noting that since Nam Sagwon was dead, all the people who were previously laying low were finally coming out of hiding. He whispered that it would be a long night as he leapt through the trees, realizing he was finally at a level where he could imitate Elder Jing Uchen's Qinggung. He thanked the elder in his heart, promising that he would definitely win. 1 hour later, the silence of the night was broken by a large man in blue and silver armor who shouted for Jin Seowoon. He demanded that the boy stop hiding and come face him already. From a nearby branch, Seowoon watched him, thinking the guy was being incredibly loud in the middle of the night. The warrior, Stenko, brandished a massive sword and called out to all the cowering bastards, asking where they were hiding and laughing that they were only hiding because they were scared of him. As Stenko stood in the clearing, Seowoon suddenly noticed a shift in the air, wondering if an arrow was coming. A glowing arrow tore through the leaves, clanging loudly against Stenko's blade as he barely managed to block it. The warrior gasped, wondering who was there, and only one person came to his mind as he called out the name Zerochana. An elf-like man with long white hair and a bow stood on a high branch, asking if Stenko knew who he was. Stenko replied that it was obvious since the legend of the divine archer Zerochana was well known among mercenaries. He asked if the archer was also trying to win this thing. Stenko suggested they team up to take out the bastard Jin Seowoon first, and Zerochana simply hummed in response before descending from the tree. Stenko smiled, telling the archer he had made the right choice and identifying himself as a mercenary who worked for the guild. He promised that Zerochana wouldn't regret this, but the archer privately noted that despite the man's reputation, his head appeared to be completely empty. The archer stood calmly, calculating the timing and thinking to himself that an archer should never make the mistake of closing the distance themselves. Stenko laughed, telling Zerochana to just give him his items and die, but before he could swing his massive sword, the archer moved with blinding speed. Zerochana delivered a lethal blow that sent blood spraying as Stenko's chest was torn open. The archer asked how he could ever cooperate with an insect like that, stating that even a passing dog would despise him. He decided he needed to find out where the bastard Jin Seowoon was, lamenting that he had already lost some time. Zerochana noted that in a situation where only 6 people remained, every person's life chi was precious. Watching from the shadows, Seowoon decided to make the archer his next source of inner energy. However, the elf-like man suddenly turned his gaze towards Seowoon's hiding spot, the blue energy around his body flaring. Seowoon panicked, wondering how he was being detected when the cloak of hiding was supposed to shield him from magic. He asked if the archer had a skill he didn't know about and cursed himself for letting his guard down while thinking about the life chi. The archer muttered that the previous mercenary was just a trash bastard and that his items were probably trash as well, concluding it wouldn't even be worth taking them before he walked away into the darkness. Seowoon collapsed against the tree trunk, noting that the man's senses were far too good. He whispered the name Zerochana, realizing the archer was his next true opponent. Moving through the dense forest as blue hexagonal patterns shimmered in the air, Jin Seowoon noted that the restricted zone was getting smaller at an even faster rate. He realized that with only 6 survivors left and 87 days remaining, the game likely adjusted its boundaries based on how many players were still active. He emerged into a clear, open area of tall grass, feeling a sense of unease as he realized fighting there would immediately catch the attention of anyone nearby. Suddenly, a series of high-pitched whistling sounds tore through the air, and Seowoon looked up to see dozens of green magical projectiles raining down on his position. He scrambled for cover as the energy streaks sliced through the grass all around him, realizing that the magic was definitely aimed at his exact location. He wondered how they could see him through his cloak of hiding. As he hunkered down, he watched as the green energy swirled through the clearing, realizing that there were more attacks than he could possibly dodge. He decided to stop running and trust in the power of his inner energy. He took a deep breath and activated the first chapter of the Unstoppable Fist, unleashing a devastating piercing fist. A massive wave of blue energy erupted from his hand, colliding with the incoming magic in a deafening explosion that leveled the tall grass. Seowoon stood in the crater, amazed by the results and admitting to himself that he was even stronger than he had previously thought. He leapt into the air, determined to figure out his enemy's location. Scanning the field from above, he spotted a dark-skinned man crouched near a tree. The man was in a state of absolute shock, wondering who the hell Seowoon was and how he had managed to block an attack that had utilized all of the man's mana. Before Seowoon could land, a figure with blue hair and dual blades materialized behind the mage, driving a curved dagger through the man's back. The assassin told the dying mage that he should have left enough mana for detection magic or a barrier. He remarked that being an assassin meant that erasing his own traces was his bread and butter, telling the man to simply rest in peace. As the mage vanished into a cloud of blue light, a system notification confirmed there were now only 5 survivors remaining. The assassin turned his cold gaze toward the trees, addressing Jin Seowoon by name. Seowoon stepped out into the open, asking if the man knew him. The assassin replied that it was obvious since Seowoon was the one who had killed the #1 public enemy, Nam Sagwang. He warned Seowoon that the remaining people were desperate to hunt him down and told him not to pointlessly resist, suggesting he just go out quietly. The assassin boasted that he had never failed to take out a target he had laid his eyes on, then commanded Seowoon to just die as he blurred into motion. The attacker was incredibly fast, but Seowoon noted he was still too slow compared to what he had seen before. Despite this, the assassin's blades managed to slice across Seowoon's arm, drawing blood. Seowoon realized that if he hadn't covered himself in internal energy at the last second, his arm would have been chopped right off, acknowledging that this bastard was truly strong. The assassin smiled, stating that Seowoon's death was now just a matter of time and claiming he had never failed an assassination in the dark. As the man vanished from sight again, Seowoon focused on the shadows, wondering if the dark was truly an advantage. The assassin reappeared behind him for a lethal strike, but Seowoon's senses and his own cloak allowed him to track the movement perfectly. He vanished and reappeared behind the assassin, commenting that while the man's stealth skills were remarkable, they were nothing compared to the cloak of hiding. He told the stunned attacker that at his level, he could follow his movements simply by tracking his energy. The assassin was terrified, calling Seowoon a cowardly bastard for appearing from behind, but Seowoon only asked if the man hadn't just said he would end him. He invited the assassin to repeat his boast as he unleashed another piercing fist. The assassin, identifying himself as Tamirin, screamed in agony as the blow landed. He pleaded for his life, asking Seowoon if he really thought he could beat everyone else on his own and suggesting they team up to reach the first-place rank. Seowoon ignored the plea and finished him off. A notification appeared showing that Jin Seowoon had eliminated Tamirin with his fist arts, leaving only 4 survivors. Seowoon let out a long breath, noting that he had absorbed the life force of both men and secured the healing scrolls they had dropped. He decided he needed to farm quickly and leave the area because of the commotion they had caused. Checking his loot, he found a shadow clone manual that had belonged to the assassin. He noted the irony of an assassin carrying something that didn't suit him at all, but was relieved the man hadn't known how to use internal energy to activate it. He realized that if the man had mastered the skill, it would have been much harder to kill him. He also found a grimoire called Carmen's Eyes on the mage's body, which was a top-tier detection spell capable of seeing through any stealth. Seowoon was frustrated to find his mana circle was too low to learn it yet, but he finally understood how the mage had seen through his cloak. Suddenly, a golden streak of light grazed his face. He realized the only archer he knew among the survivors was the man from before. A massive wave of blue energy erupted from the forest, and Seowoon looked on in shock, having never seen this type of magic and wondering who could be casting it. He knew it was too late to run and decided to concentrate all of his internal energy into a single strike. He shouted the name of his ultimate move, the Unstoppable Fist, Ultimate Piercing Fist, and drove his glowing hand into the heart of the magical storm. The collision created a massive shockwave, and Seowoon was surprised to realize that 2 different attacks had come at him at once. He realized he was being double-teamed. A calm voice from the shadows told him he was quite strong. A man with a mustache and a golden cape, identified by the system as Centurk, the king of Krusen, stepped forward while swinging a massive golden blade. Seowoon backed away, realizing that there were actually 3 opponents surrounding him. Standing together were Centurk, the hooded skeleton known as Gyron, the Demon King's right arm, and the divine archer Zerochana. Centurk declared that Seowoon's luck had finally run out. As the system labels appeared, Seowoon was labeled simply as a normal bloke. He stared at the 3 legendary warriors and wondered what the hell he was supposed to do now. Seowoon cursed under his breath, realizing that he was just 1 step away from his goal and was now facing multiple players who had decided to form a team. He knew that the fastest way to break up such an alliance was to create a situation where they had no choice but to betray each other, but he admitted he could not figure out their interests since he had never seen these people before in his life. Suddenly, the skeletal warrior Gyron leapt into the center of the field, addressing the king and stating it was an honor to meet him. Centurk was visibly offended, asking how a mere black mage dared to speak to a king. Gyron laughed at the dismissal and apologized for his rudeness, but pointed out that in this world, there was something much more important than social status. He suggested that it would be better for them to cooperate even with a scoundrel if it meant gaining better rewards. Watching from a distance, Seowoon realized that this was not a planned team effort after all. Centurk agreed with the mage's logic and told Gyron to take care of Seowoon's troublesome stealth. Gyron replied that doing so would be as good as a piece of cake for him. Gyron's hand began to glow with an intense, golden light that pierced through the shadows. Seowoon ground his teeth in frustration, asking himself what this new power was as the brilliance flooded the area. Gyron proclaimed that there was no longer any darkness for Seowoon to hide in, and Centurk noted with a chuckle that the mage was smarter than he had initially thought. Seowoon felt a cold sweat break out, realizing that such a method was possible and that his cloak of stealth could only conceal him in total darkness. He acknowledged that the item was never without a weakness. Gyron continued, stating that he wanted to thank the dead Nam Sagwang for killing Escrow, who had been a thorn in his side. The mage lamented that he could not deliver that message personally, but asked what else he could do since that was the law of this place. In the name of the great demon lord, he declared it was time for Seowoon to die. Gyron unleashed his Chaos Blade, also known as the Dark Blade Storm, as purple ribbons of energy began to swirl around his body. Seowoon knew from his experience that mages were usually vulnerable in close combat. He reasoned that if he got too close, he might get swept away by the magic, so he intended to make it difficult for them to properly cast their spells. Seowoon decided to finish the fight with ultra-close combat no matter what. Gyron sneered at the attempt, calling Seowoon a foolish brute and telling him to just die. A massive wave of dark energy erupted, tearing through the grass. Seowoon focused on circulating as much internal energy as possible around his body to minimize the damage, commanding himself to break through and get close. He let out a pained groan as the energy sliced into him. A system notification flashed, informing him that his cloak of stealth had been damaged and would lose its function until repaired. He cursed, feeling his internal energy shield breaking and realizing that even his cloak was failing him. Gyron mocked his struggle, stating that at this rate, Seowoon would be torn to shreds with no trace left. Suddenly, Seowoon activated the first chapter of his Severing Fist. Gyron was caught completely off guard as Seowoon followed up with a straight-cut fist. Seowoon stood his ground, blood dripping from his face, while Gyron stood up and called him a foolish brat. The mage claimed Seowoon had no chance of winning anyway and told him to give up as he activated his Chaos Deadman hands, also known as the Touch of the Dead. Gyron's arm transformed into a giant, violet limb wreathed in a terrifying aura. Seowoon realized that this was an opponent on a completely different level from any mage he had faced before. He quickly initiated his spirit illusion steps, creating multiple afterimages of himself as he leapt through the air. Gyron was shocked, asking what was happening and noting he thought the boy only threw punches, not realizing he could use illusion magic as well. He yelled that Seowoon was showing off troublesome tricks. Seowoon prepared his final strike, stating that with this, his victory was complete. As Seowoon closed in, Gyron tried to raise a barrier in a panic. However, Centurk suddenly appeared behind Gyron, his blade glowing with a piercing aura. With a swift movement, the king stabbed the mage through the chest from behind. Gyron was speechless, asking what was happening and gasping that the man who called himself king was doing something so vile. Centurk replied coldly that there was no greater justification than victory. He drove the blade further in, adding that he had never intended to truly collaborate with a wretch like the mage from the start. Senturk thanked Gyron for helping him eliminate a nuisance, and a system notification announced that Senturk had eliminated Gyron with his swordsmanship. The king looked toward the cliffside and addressed the divine archer, Zerochana. He noted that the archer had been a headache for his army and found it strange that they had come to face each other in a duel. Zerochana smiled thinly, stating that the duel didn't seem to be starting just yet. Senturk asked what he was talking about, only to be surprised when Seowoon lunged forward again. The impact sent Senturk's helmet flying and filled the area with blue energy. Seowoon panted heavily, realizing he had finally made it to the top 2 survivors. Watching from above, Zerochana remarked that he had thought Seowoon died by the king's sword, but concluded it must have been an illusion. Seowoon, his face covered in blood, told the archer to stop spouting nonsense and come at him. Zerochana only smiled, asking why everyone was in such a hurry and noting that the other person clearly had business with Seowoon first. Senturk stood up, his armor shattered. He cursed Seowoon, calling him a damn bastard for using such unpleasant tricks. He admitted he thought he saw his blade pierce through earlier, but acknowledged that Seowoon's strength to shatter armor made by a Carson master was impressive. Seowoon told him to stop talking and come at him, asking if he wanted to fight one by one or together. Senturk glared, promising that Seowoon would regret making him give his best. The king moved with incredible speed, startling Seowoon as he stabbed his rapier through the boy's hand. Senturk identified himself and stated that he was confident he would not lose to anyone when it came to speed. He explained that he had aimed for the ligaments so Seowoon would be unable to move that hand, noting that the boy's strange technique seemed to require both hands. Seowoon was in agony, realizing the king was a speed specialist whose velocity was so great he could barely sense his chi. He thought to himself that he could not afford to lose after getting all the way to the end. He decided it was still too early to give up and resolved to trust the internal energy within him. He caught Senturk's rapier with his bare hand, shocking the king, who asked how he dared to touch his weapon. Seowoon ignored the pain and unleashed his black annihilation hand, wounding Senturk's face. The king shouted in rage, asking how a brat dared to wound him, while Seowoon gripped his wounded arm. Senturk noted that Seowoon insisted on struggling to the very end and activated his aura blade, also known as the Formless Sword. He admitted that by making him use his aura blade, he had to acknowledge Seowoon's strength. Seowoon breathed heavily, deciding he could use his full power. He activated his spirit illusion steps along with a full internal energy release. Multiple clones of Seowoon appeared, surrounding the king. Senturk admitted that the boy certainly had troublesome tricks, but remained defiant, stating that the victor was always him. Seowoon told him that the fight was real now and that the king should brace himself because he was nothing but dead weight. Nearby, Zerochana let out a long yawn, asking for someone to just win so they could get this over with quickly. A system notification confirmed that there were now only 3 survivors remaining. Multiple versions of Jin Seowoon surrounded King Senturk as the boy declared that from this moment on, he would truly face him. Senturk scoffed at the display, telling the boy to stop his chattering and just attack. Secretly, the king checked his internal clock, noting that his aura blade only had a maximum duration of 2 minutes and he had to finish the fight before that time expired. Seowoon was equally pressured, realizing his internal energy was almost completely depleted and knowing that this final exchange had to be the end of it. With a determined shout, Seowoon lunged forward, sending his clones into the fray. Senturk swung his glowing rapier through a figure, but his eyes widened when he realized it was just an illusion. He growled that the boy was a slippery bastard as he slashed through another clone that failed to offer any physical resistance. The king became increasingly frustrated, unable to feel any impact in his hands and wondering if every target was merely a fake. He resolved that whether he was facing the main body or a duplicate, he would simply cut them all down. Suddenly, a heavy fist slammed into Senturk's jaw, drawing blood. The king staggered, realizing he had finally found the main body, but Seowoon only mocked him by asking how he liked the taste of Alocha's punch. He warned the king to stop wasting effort trying to distinguish the duplicates, explaining that every clone created by his spirit illusion steps was capable of attacking just like the original. To drive the point home, Seowoon unleashed his Severing Fist Chapter 1, delivering a straight-cut kick that Senturk barely managed to parry. The king unleashed a piercing aura that shattered several of the clones, noting that their durability was actually quite terrible. Seowoon counted his remaining 5 clones, while the king grew anxious, realizing he had only about a minute of his power left. High on a cliff, Zerochana watched the struggle with surprise, having not expected Senturk to have such a hard time. Driven to desperation, the king shouted for Zerochana to stop standing there and help him, promising a reward of anything the archer wanted if he helped him win. Zerochana merely watched with a bored expression and warned the king to watch out ahead. Senturk turned back just as Seowoon launched a massive attack. The king countered with his crushing wave aura, but Seowoon invoked the Manpei Janbop from his manual, shattering the king's defense. Senturk managed to block the blow but was pushed to his limit. He lunged forward again, claiming he finally had the real Jin Seowoon in his sights. He drove his blade through a chest, and blood splattered across the tall grass, but his victory turned to horror as the body dissolved into smoke. He realized he had been toyed with and called the experience truly humiliating. Senturk's face twisted in rage as he declared he no longer cared about winning. He vowed to use all of his remaining strength to rip Seowoon to shreds, causing Zerochana to wonder if the legendary Emperor of Madness was being revived. Senturk unleashed his aura blade's lightning form, challenging Seowoon to avoid the massive electrical discharge. A blinding explosion of light engulfed the boy, who let out a scream of agony as he was thrown to the ground. Seowoon groaned, realizing that if things continued this way, only Zerochana would benefit from their mutual destruction. Senturk didn't listen, driving his sword through Seowoon's chest as blood pooled on the floor. The king panted heavily, standing over the limp body and noting that he had barely finished the execution before his aura expired. He whispered that if he had been even a second late, he would have been done for. However, he soon felt a chill when he realized there was no physical impact in his hand. The figure beneath him vanished, and the real Seowoon appeared behind him, dealing a lethal blow. A notification appeared announcing that Jin Seowoon had eliminated Senturk by utilizing his strength. Seowoon looked at the king's treasure chest, noting that he would have been in serious trouble if he hadn't drained the man's stamina with his clones. There were now only 2 survivors. Zerochana called out from the cliff, thanking Seowoon for eliminating the king, who had been quite a headache for his army. He mocked the king's competitive spirit and told Seowoon that because he had poured all his strength into that fight, he would now die at the archer's hand. Zerochana drew his bow, promising to personally honor the boy's struggle as he released a massive, glowing arrow. Seowoon could only stare in shock as the projectile tore toward him. Basking in the green glow of his newly acquired power, Jin Seowoon noted that while it was not quite as much as what Namsakwang had provided, it was definitely still a large amount of vitality. He believed that with this much strength, he could finally face off against the divine archer, Zerochana. He turned his gaze toward the cliffside, his body tensing as he prepared for the final confrontation. Suddenly, he blurred into motion, activating his immeasurable steps to charge directly toward his opponent. Zerochana watched from above, his expression turning serious as he recognized the troublesome doppelganger technique once again. The archer did not hesitate, drawing his bow and releasing a glowing arrow with lethal precision. The projectile tore through the air and struck one of Seowoon's afterimages, causing blood to splatter as the clone was destroyed. Seowoon felt a surge of alarm as the archer's accuracy proved to be a major threat. Zerochana moved with practiced grace, leaping down from the cliff and declaring that he had to make sure the boy could not escape. Seowoon shouted a desperate refusal, but it was too late. Zerochana pinned him to the ground, driving a sharp arrow directly through Seowoon's hand. Seowoon let out a guttural scream of agony, blood soaking the grass beneath him. Through his pain, he demanded to know how on earth the archer had figured out which was the real body so quickly. Zerochana wore a calm, almost predatory smile, stating that his success was simply due to a gut feeling. He loomed over the wounded youth, pointing another arrow at his head and noting that Seowoon had worked incredibly hard to get this far. He told the boy that he respected his efforts, but Seowoon spat back, telling the archer to give his respect to the dogs instead. The archer's gaze remained cold as he released the final shot. A massive spray of blood followed as the arrow pierced Seowoon's skull, silencing him forever. A system notification chimed in the void, announcing that Zerochana had eliminated Jin Seowoon with a headshot. The archer stood over the resulting treasure chest, wondering aloud if it was finally over. The world suddenly dissolved into static, like a television losing its signal, as a message announced that Cloyd Survival had officially ended. He cursed his luck, lamenting that he had totally messed up and given the victory away at the very last second. He comforted himself with the thought that he did at least get to eat the vitality meal that Namsakwang had prepared. Another interface appeared, offering congratulations for being among the final 2 survivors and informing him that he had qualified to participate in the next game. Seowoon was startled, realizing that his journey was far from over. The system then calculated his rewards, informing him that including his kill bonus points, he had earned 140 reward coins. Seowoon questioned what the coins were for, just as the items he had acquired during the game were summoned before him. He saw the Ring of Strength, Cameron's necklace, and the magic books he had looted, noting that he had picked up quite a lot of stuff. The interface explained that he could take these items back to his world by purchasing them with his reward coins. Seowoon's eyes widened when he saw that the Spirit Illusion Steps manual cost 130 coins. He complained that it was far too expensive and would use almost all of his earnings. Just then, a new prompt appeared, stating that the final 5 players were given a chance to spin a roulette to draw a random item. Seowoon realized it was a gacha system and was pleased to learn that since he had come in second place, he was granted 2 chances. He hoped that if he could win either the Cloak of Invisibility or the Spirit Illusion steps through the spin, he could save a significant number of coins. He watched with bated breath as the wheel spun, shouting for it to stop. The first result was a Scrow's necklace, and Seowoon groaned in frustration, calling it a joke since it was the cheapest item available. Determined not to give up, he reminded himself he had one more chance and began to pray to every deity he could think of for help. He watched the wheel spin again, his face a mask of desperation as he yelled for it to stop once more. The wheel landed on Spirit Illusion steps, and Seowoon erupted in a cheer of pure joy. He called the win awesome, noting it was the most expensive thing he could have gotten and felt as though he had effectively doubled his coins. The system then provided the items he had won and prompted him to start shopping with his remaining currency, warning that he would automatically move once he finished. Seowoon found it difficult to choose because there were so many tempting items, but he eventually compromised and finished his purchases. The system told him he had done well and wished him luck in the next game. With a sudden flash of light, Seowoon found himself standing in a modern alleyway near some trash bins. He looked around in confusion, asking if he had truly come back. His eyes fell on his old backpack sitting on the pavement, and he let out a gasp of realization. He looked at his hand and saw a dark ring with a purple gem, confirming it was the ring of subspace he had brought from Cloyd Survival. He realized with a start that the entire experience had not been a dream. Picking up his bag, he began the long walk home through the neon-lit streets of the city. On the surface, it seemed as though nothing had changed, but he could feel a massive transformation beginning within himself. He smiled, thinking to himself that his upcoming English proficiency exams were no longer his biggest problem. He looked at the ring again, recalling the system's message that there would be a second game. He noted that he had barely secured second place this time and vowed that he was definitely going to win the next one. He arrived at the small studio apartment his parents had found for him to use while preparing for university. Dropping his bag on a chair, he sat on the floor in the center of the dark room and tried to focus. Unlike when he was inside the game world, he could feel that his danjon was completely empty. He wondered if he had expended all of his internal energy in the final battle against the king. He realized he couldn't just go around killing people in the real world to gain power, so he decided he had to train properly. He recalled a lesson from Elder Jang Dochian, who had explained that internal energy was generally accumulated through a process called chukji. The elder had told him that once a danjon was formed, focusing on that spot would naturally allow him to gather energy. Although it wouldn't be as fast as absorbing vitality, the master had promised that if he made chukji a part of his daily life, he would eventually achieve great mastery. Seowoon remembered asking if he could really become as strong as the elder just by training. The old man had laughed, calling him bold, and compared the boy to a wren trying to follow a stork. The elder had warned that his body might break from the effort, but had privately wondered if Seowoon was a useless wren or a baby stork. Seowoon closed his eyes and began to meditate. Jin Seowoon sat in his apartment, letting out a long breath as 4 hours of meditation passed. He gritted his teeth, realizing that the process was taking much longer than it had in the game, and he wondered why the amount of inner energy he was accumulating felt so small. Frustration boiled over and he cursed loudly, acknowledging that the real world was far different from the virtual experience. At this rate, he calculated it would take years to build his power, so he decided to stop digging himself into a hole and focus on organizing the items he had brought back instead. He reached into his subspace and pulled out a manual titled The Book of Iron Free Fist, which had cost him 30 coins. He wished he had managed to secure more useful martial arts, wondering if he would have to learn this bit by bit through physical training just like his internal energy. A system prompt appeared in the air, asking if he would like to learn the skill, and Seowoon's eyes widened as he realized the game's mechanics still applied to reality. He pressed the button and felt the knowledge flow into him, launching into a series of strikes. While he had learned the art, he noted its power was on a completely different level compared to when his internal energy was full. He searched his subspace again and pulled out Escrow's necklace, which he had won in a lottery for a single coin. Remembering he had heard it was pure gold, he bit down on the metal and confirmed it was genuine. He estimated that for its weight, it had to be worth at least 10 million won, and his jaw dropped at the realization that a single coin from the game held such immense value. He imagined bringing back 10 more necklaces from the next game, which would net him at least 100 million won. He marveled at how even items that were useless in the game could have completely different values here. He then examined a vial of refined troll's blood, noting it promised a healthy life for a full year to whoever drank it. He thought about the potential profit if he could sell such items to terminally ill rich people, realizing Cloyd Survival was an incredible opportunity. Feeling a pang of hunger after his cultivation, he decided to go out and eat. He visited a local spot called Grandma's Restaurant and ordered a 5,001 set meal, the only luxury he allowed himself. As he ate the white rice, he reflected on how much he had craved this while tearing at tough jerky in the game, admitting that the constant diet of dried meat had almost killed him. The elderly owner watched him with a scowl, asking the other customers what was wrong with the jerk who had been there the day before, acting so crazy now. She told him not to cry because it would scare away his luck and reminded him he was a man. Seowoon thanked her through his tears, and she told him to stop fooling around and clean his plate, offering more if it wasn't enough. He smiled, realizing that the time spent in the game didn't reflect at all in reality. After finishing his meal, he thanked her and left, focused on the need to accumulate energy before the next game started. He looked at the ring of strength on his finger, wondering if the stats would apply the same way in his world. He tested it with a simple jump and was launched high into the sky, soaring over the city rooftops. He shouted in shock as his body overflowed with power, realizing he had to be careful not to be seen. He landed safely in an alley, hoping no one had recorded him since it would be a real hassle if the video were uploaded somewhere. He decided to use his most expensive item, the elixir of inner sight, which had cost 50 coins. He recalled the burning sensation it caused in the game and hesitated for only a second before drinking the entire vial. A violent surge of blue energy erupted from his body, and light poured from his eyes as he screamed in agony. 3 hours later, the heat emanating from his room was so intense that an elderly neighbor called the police. She told the arriving officers that the wall was so hot she couldn't even grab her doorknob. One officer suggested she should have called the fire department instead, but she insisted it didn't seem like a fire. The police suspected a boiler issue, but they knocked on Seowoon's door anyway, identifying themselves and asking if he was all right. They shouted that they had received a complaint and were there to help. Seowoon finally opened the door, drenched in sweat and looking haggard. He asked who they were, and they explained the report of a possible fire. He lied, saying he just had a bit of a fever and had turned the boiler up too high. The officers were skeptical, but Seowoon insisted he would be fine with rest. They eventually left, grumbling to the neighbor about being called for such trivial matters. Seowoon closed the door and collapsed, realizing he had almost died from the elixir's energy. He noted that if it hadn't been for the White Supreme Banquet technique, he wouldn't have been able to contain the fire-like power. He recognized there was a subtle risk when using these items in reality compared to the game. He practiced his martial arts, performing the Fist of Nothingness and the 10,000 Defeat Palm, which resulted in his desk chair being shattered into pieces. He resolved to buy a new chair once he sold his gold necklace. The next day, he went to a park on a mountain to train, but found it was too crowded during the day. He decided he would have to wait until after sunset to practice properly. As he hung upside down from a bar, he spotted a group of high school bullies smoking in a non-smoking area. An elderly man approached them and told them it was wrong for students to be smoking. One of the bullies, Dongjun, told the man his own parents didn't say anything to him and asked who he thought he was. The elder replied that it must be a flaw in the boy's upbringing, which sent the bully into a rage. The student demanded to know what the old man was talking about, and Seowoon sensed things were about to go south. The bully shouted at the old geezer, asking if he had a death wish as he lunged forward. Seowoon intervened with a lightning-fast kick, sending the student flying into the equipment. He told the boy that no matter how rude he was, he shouldn't attack an elder. The other students were horrified, calling out for their leader, Mi Minsik. A large, intimidating student approached and looked Seowoon up and down, calling him a shaggy-haired guy. He noted they hadn't met before and asked Seowoon if he wanted to die. Seowoon felt a bead of sweat roll down his face, realizing that things were about to get really troublesome. The high school bully lay on the ground, groaning in pain as blood pooled around his head. His older brother, a large student in a gray blazer named Mi Minsik, stared down at the sight before looking up at Jin Seowoon, asking if he was the one who had done this to his younger sibling. Seowoon remained calm, explaining that the boy was the one who had caused the problem first. He pointed out that the younger brother had shown no respect to the elderly, literally attacking an old man without provocation. Mi Minsik's expression remained cold as he stated that if high school kids were smoking in public like that, they should be made aware that they could get into serious trouble. Seowoon let out a light laugh, suggesting that if the large student was truly the older brother, he should have educated the boy properly in the first place. Seowoon privately admitted that he might have gone a little overboard, but he felt he didn't have much of a choice since he couldn't simply stand by and let the student hit the elder. Suddenly, Mi Minsik lunged forward, his fist cutting through the air with a powerful whistle. Seowoon didn't flinch, invoking his unstoppable fist technique and unleashing a piercing fist. The counterattack carried so much force that the older brother was nearly lifted off his feet. Seowoon cursed himself internally, realizing he hadn't controlled his strength properly. The bully struggled to his feet, coughing as he wondered what the hell was happening and asking himself what Seowoon was even doing. Seowoon watched with a neutral expression as the student pulled out a set of butterfly knives, flipping them open with practiced speed. The older brother demanded to know where a freak like Seowoon had crawled out from, calling him a creepy son of a bitch and swearing to kill him. Seowoon only laughed, noting that the older brother was just as out of control as the younger one. The bully charged with a scream, but as the fight continued, Seowoon realized that fighting ordinary people had become far too easy for him. He decided he needed to scale back his power significantly to avoid a catastrophe, resolving to stick to only 50% of his strength. He unleashed an undefeated palm strike at half power, sending a shockwave through the clearing. The impact slammed the bully against a massive tree, leaving him slumped and unconscious. The other students watched in horror, shouting that the display was absolutely crazy and wondering if their leader was dead. Seowoon felt a wave of regret, realized that this wasn't what he meant to do at all. To cover his tracks, he began to act as if they were on a movie set, laughing and complimenting the bullies on their dramatic acting. He asked if they were action movie actors before giving them a final warning to respect their elders, quit smoking, and stop carrying dangerous weapons. He dashed away into the forest, leaving the stunned students behind. As he ran, he cursed his own recklessness, wondering what he was thinking showing off his strength to regular people. He knew that if the boy had died, his own life would have been over. He concluded that even though he had learned these skills easily from the game, he would need proper training to control them perfectly. 1 month later, Seowoon sat in his apartment, the air shimmering with blue light as he practiced his cultivation. His focus was interrupted by the vibration of his phone. His mother's voice came through the line, asking if he had eaten. He confirmed that he had, and she explained that she had called because she was worried when he didn't answer. She asked about the new academy he was supposedly enrolled in, and he lied that it was manageable, unable to tell her he was training in martial arts instead of studying for his exams. He asked how his father was doing with his new delivery job, but his mother went silent before tearfully revealing that Seowoon's father had been in a car accident. She explained that a car had run a red light and hit him while he was making deliveries. She worried that the surgery costs would be steep, and despite her guilt for asking, she asked if Seowoon had any of his allowance left. Seowoon's expression hardened as he looked at the gold necklace from the game. He asked how much the surgery would cost, and his mother estimated around 1 or 2 million won. He told her not to worry, promising he had a solution, and told her he would call her back. Reflecting on his childhood, he remembered how his parents had spent their lives bouncing between rented homes. His dad had worked harder than anyone, but as he aged, his income shrank and his jobs became easily replaceable. Seowoon looked at his reflection, acknowledging that he used to be a freeloading burden with no future, but declared that he was that person no longer. He took the pure gold necklace to a jewelry shop, where the clerk marveled at the excellent craftsmanship. She noted that it didn't look like a local item and its styling wasn't done through modern techniques. Seowoon lied, claiming it had been in his family for 5 generations. The clerk mentioned that the piece could be worth more than just the value of the gold and asked if he was sure he wanted to sell it. Seowoon explained his father's urgent need for surgery, and the clerk pointed out that he lacked a certificate of authenticity. Despite this, the sale went through, and Seowoon later checked his bank balance to find 11,500,000 won. He noted that gold prices had surged lately and that he now had enough to help his parents and get by for a while. He realized he had likely undersold the item due to the clerk's excitement, but he didn't mind since he needed the quick cash. He resolved to find better ways to sell the items he brought back in the future. After calling his mother to tell her he had sent the money, she was shocked, asking where he could have possibly gotten such a sum and fearing he had taken out a loan. He reassured her that he had simply saved it from his time in the army and part-time jobs. She cried as she thanked him, and he promised to visit the hospital soon. Later, while riding the subway, he overheard 2 men arguing over a video on a phone. One insisted it was fake CG, but the other noted it looked like it was filmed secretly. Seowoon glanced at the screen and his heart skipped a beat as he saw a recording of a mage using escrow's flame. He realized he wasn't the only person in Korea who had experienced Cloyd Survival. He watched as the video was suddenly deleted, which the passengers found weird. Seowoon realized that if others had been given the same opportunity as him, there would be serious consequences. At the same time, in a high-security office, a man in a suit spoke frantically into a telephone, promising someone on the other end that they would cut off internet access across the entire country if necessary to stop the leaks. He hung up and apologized to his superior, a man with a mustache sitting behind a large desk. The boss asked about the person who had uploaded the video, and the subordinate explained that the number of survivors had surged so dramatically that it was almost impossible to keep track of them all. The boss became enraged, asking why the number of agents wasn't increasing at the same rate. He demanded that they find the attention-seeking bastard who posted the video. The boss sighed, wondering if his weak agents could even catch the survivors, noting that he was already having enough headaches dealing with a group called the Free Bears. He ordered his men to get moving, and they hurried out of the room. After the summer heat passed, the night breeze became chilly. In the 2 months following his first game, Jin Seowoon dedicated himself to training at night when the streets were empty and people were asleep. He had gathered a good amount of inner energy and become much more accustomed to wielding it in his daily life. Moving through the dark forest with supernatural agility, he performed a series of hand signs and commanded a shadow clone to manifest. A dark duplicate of himself appeared, and Seowoon followed up by unleashing the unstoppable fist, Spatial Strike. A wave of blue energy rippled through the air, but Seowoon noted with a frown that with his current level of inner energy, he could only summon a single shadow clone at a time. He also realized that the duration of the technique was not very long, which limited its usefulness in a prolonged fight. He engaged in a mock battle with his duplicate, testing his limits as he exchanged blows in the moonlight. After a particularly intense clash that sent a shockwave through the trees, he collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. He wondered if he had truly reached his limit, reflecting on how he had easily controlled 8 shadows during his fight with King Centurk. He realized that he must have expended a massive amount of his core energy during that final battle, leaving his current Dantian looking pitiful in comparison. He told himself there was no point in sulking about it and decided he should just go home and cultivate more. As his stomach began to growl, he wondered what food he had left in his subspace. Suddenly, a familiar blue light began to envelop his body, and his eyes widened in surprise. With a sudden flash, he was transported away, finding himself standing in the middle of a massive crowd of confused people. Voices in foreign languages echoed through the field, with some shouting in Russian and others in Chinese, asking where the hell they were and what everyone was doing. Seowoon looked at the warriors and commoners around him, noting that many looked just as confused as he had been during his first drop. He wondered if he had truly been pulled into another game after only 2 months. A system notification chimed, thanking everyone for participating in Cloyd Survival and announcing the beginning of the tutorial explanation. Seowoon was shocked, remembering that the tutorial had been skipped last time. He realized this meant there were many more beginners participating this time around. As he scanned the crowd, he spotted a young man sitting on a jagged rock, wearing a gray school blazer and a tie. He wondered if the boy was a high school student and realized that another person from Korea was participating in the game. The student looked bored, and Seowoon grumbled to himself that the kid was likely just trying to cultivate an edgy aura for attention. However, he paused, noting that the boy looked like he had played these types of games before. He wondered if the student was a monstrously strong player like Nam Sagwon. The system then announced that with 200 players present, the game would now commence. The difficulty was set to the lowest level, and the participants were told to reach the top 200. The designated map was the Valley of Kantras, and rewards were promised starting from rank 20. Seowoon realized that if 200 people were participating and 200 could pass, there was effectively no risk of failing the tutorial. His expression turned dark and predatory as he decided that if there was no risk, he was going to play this round like a complete psycho. However, the tutorial instructions continued with a very surprising announcement. This game was a duo game. Seowoon was floored, realizing it was no longer a solo survival. The system instructed everyone to find a partner and conduct a duo registration within 5 minutes. It explained that the game would continue until only one team remained, and as long as one member of a team survived until the end, both players would receive the rewards. If a player failed to find a partner within the time limit, they would be forced to play the game solo. Seowoon watched the crowd, noting that since everyone was meeting for the first time, they were scrambling to form teams based on nothing but appearances. He knew that a wrong pick could result in a teammate becoming literal dead weight. He looked for the high schooler from earlier, thinking that since he didn't look like a beginner, he might actually be useful. But when he looked toward the rock, the student was gone. Seowoon wondered where the boy went and how he could have moved so fast. Left with no other choice, he began approaching other players, asking if they wanted to be his duo. Every time he asked, a notification popped up stating that the participant was already in a duo. He became increasingly frustrated, wondering how he was supposed to find a single available person among the hundreds in the field. As the countdown for Cloyd Survival reached its end, Seowoon gritted his teeth. Since he had no choice, he resolved to win whether he faced the challenges as a solo player or against duos. He promised himself he would kill them all and take the victory. The game officially started, and Seowoon plummeted toward the Valley of Kantras. He spotted several villages scattered across the map that looked like good spots for farming. He targeted one that seemed promising and commanded the system to descend. He plummeted toward the rooftops in a pillar of blue light, resolving to wipe out anyone who dared to follow him down. He landed in the middle of a quiet village square, noting 6 other pillars of light descending nearby. He calculated that he was facing at least 3 other teams. After the first game ended, he had replayed it over and over in his head, performing countless mental simulations to prepare for this moment. He felt ready to execute his plan. Nearby, a young mage wearing a large pointed hat landed in the grass, groaning that he didn't know what was happening and complaining that he felt nauseous. Seowoon didn't give him a moment to recover. He leapt from a nearby rooftop, shouting the name of his technique, Unstoppable Fist, Spatial Strike. The blow landed with a heavy metallic clang, and the mage cried out in terror, asking who Seowoon was and why he was being attacked. Seowoon didn't answer, simply noting that it was 1 down. He immediately followed up by invoking a new move, Unstoppable Fist, Bone Shatter. His fist slammed into the mage with a sickening crack, sending the boy flying backward and coughing up blood. A system notification informed Seowoon that his opponent had been knocked out and instructed him to finish the mage with a final strike before a teammate could revive him. Seowoon appreciated the new team-based mechanics, thinking the system was pretty nice. Just as he prepared to deliver the final blow, a knight in heavy silver armor and a red cape charged out of the shadows, wielding a massive stone-tipped lance. Seowoon sensed the attack and spun around, barely managing to block the thrust. The impact was enormous. Seowoon gritted his teeth, blood trickling down his face as he realized the knight must be the fallen mage's teammate. As Jin Seowoon crouched low to the ground, his fingers dug into the dirt as he felt the vibrations of a powerful presence. He noted to himself that the force standing before him possessed some truly incredible strength. Standing tall in a suit of silver plate armor, a knight gripped a heavy shield and a stone-tipped lance, his eyes locked onto the young man. With a voice muffled by his helmet, the knight demanded to know if Seowoon was the person who had killed his comrade. Looking at the warrior, Seowoon observed that he appeared to be someone heavily specialized in close-quarters combat. He reflected on the nature of the unstoppable fist, realizing that because the technique relied entirely on bare hands, the most important thing to consider was how to deal with opponents armed with bows, spears, or swords. In reality, there was normally no way to face such weapons head-on, and up until now, he had only practiced the necessary counter techniques through intense image training. Just the thought that he could finally try it out in this game made him feel a surge of excitement, and before he knew it, a wide grin spread across his face. Standing up and cracking his neck, he whispered to himself that this was going to be fun. Seowoon bared his teeth in a predatory smile as he prepared his body for the collision. With a thunderous shout, the knight called out for a charge and lunged forward with his lance leveled. Seowoon did not back away, instead stepping into the path of the whistling wood and steel. As the point of the spear neared his chest, he called upon his counter technique. With a precise, fluid motion, he struck the side of the spearhead, the impact ringing out as he diverted the massive momentum of the knight's thrust. The armored man's eyes widened in shock as he realized Seowoon had not only closed the distance but had shifted the entire trajectory of his attack. The knight gritted his teeth, his eyes glowing with a desperate red light as he struggled to recover his balance. Seowoon saw his chance and noted the massive opening in the knight's defense. Pulling his hand back, he gathered his internal energy into his palm, preparing to end the fight. Harnessing the white martial physique arts, he unleashed a spatial strike that bypassed the knight's heavy plate. A sickening crack echoed through the air as the blow connected with the man's throat and chest, sending a spray of crimson blood across the cobblestones. The knight groaned in agony, his body buckling under the sheer pressure of the strike. Seowoon didn't give him a moment to breathe, reaching out to grab the man's helmet before slamming a heavy fist directly into his face. Seowoon leapt into the air, delivering a finishing blow that sent the armored warrior crashing into the stone ground. A heavy thud signaled the end of the struggle. As the knight lay motionless and gasping his final breath, Seowoon stood over him and looked down with cold indifference. Blood dripped from his knuckles as he stepped over the fallen body, quietly stating that there were now 2 down. As the knight's life faded, a green aura of vitality rose from the body and flowed into Seowoon. He felt the surge of power and thought to himself that this man had possessed a significant amount of life chi. He realized that no matter how much he cultivated on his own, there was simply nothing like the rapid growth of absorbing life chi within the game. He checked his surroundings, sensing that there were now only 4 people left in this immediate area. Suddenly, a sharp whistling sound cut through the air, and Seowoon felt a sudden spike of danger. A wooden projectile streaked toward him, shattering against the stone wall right where his head had been a second before. He reacted instantly, his eyes darting toward the source of the attack. He demanded to know where that had come from and immediately decided to follow the trajectory of the shot. Looking toward the cluster of buildings on the side of the village, he realized the attacker must be hiding in one of the houses. A dark shape flickered in a window, and Seowoon cursed under his breath, realizing he was being targeted again. He scrambled up the side of a stone wall as another projectile tore through the air, narrowly missing him. A shallow cut opened on his cheek, and as he wiped the blood away, he wondered if more enemies were just going to keep coming for him. Eventually, he dove into the cover of the nearby forest, his boots skidding across the dirt. He analyzed the precision of the shots, thinking that if they were this accurate from such a distance, they were a serious threat. For a moment, he wondered if it was Zorochana, the divine archer who had killed him before, but he quickly dismissed the thought, noting that these attacks were not nearly as strong as his old rivals. Seowoon moved through the trees, questioning if the archer was alone or if a teammate was currently chasing him from another angle. He reached out and touched a tree trunk, centering himself. He decided it didn't matter what their plan was. As long as he could figure out the archer's position and catch one of them, the other was bound to reveal themselves. He reflected on how much he had changed since the first game. If this were the previous world, he would have been hiding inside a house and farming items as safely as possible. But now, his sights were set entirely on life chi. To him, enemies had become nothing more than fuel for him to absorb. An arrow hissed through the air, nearly grazing his temple, and he looked up to see a cloaked figure perched high above. The archer, a man with tribal markings on his face, gasped in surprise as he realized his target was still alive. Suddenly, a heavy boot slammed into the archer's back, sending him tumbling. The archer groaned as he hit the tiles, looking back in horror. Seowoon frowned, realizing his kick had made contact, yet the man was already starting to fade away. He wondered where the man had disappeared to as he looked at the blood on the ground. His eyes widened as a shimmering outline appeared directly behind him. He realized with a start that the man was using a cloak of hiding. Seowoon sensed the shadow behind him and reacted just as a red gem on the archer's equipment flashed with light. The assassin swung his blade, but Seowoon twisted away, the red energy of the weapon carving a path through the air. The archer, realizing he had missed his killing blow, cursed and wondered if Seowoon had somehow gotten behind him to escape. The man leapt through a window and scrambled down into the alley below, his feet tapping rapidly against the stone. Seowoon watched him from the balcony, a cold look in his eyes. He asked the fleeing man if he really thought he could leave so easily. Seowoon leapt from the ledge. The archer was huffing and panting, his stamina clearly depleted as he sprinted through the village streets. He turned a corner only to see Seowoon waiting for him, blocking the path. The man let out a terrified he-ache as he nearly ran into his pursuer. Seowoon looked at him with disdain, telling the man that he didn't know where he had obtained that cloak, but coming at him in broad daylight while wearing it was a big mistake. He mocked the item, saying it was something one could easily get to the top with just by camping, and called the situation a shame. He looked the archer in the eye and told him to just die already and give the cloak to him. Just as Seowoon moved to finish the job, a calm, cold voice told him that was enough. A tall, pale elf with long white hair and green markings on his face stepped out from the shadows, a large curved blade in his hand. The elf looked at the trembling archer and apologized, saying he was sorry for the delay and that Seowoon was simply quicker than he looked. The archer, desperate and angry, yelled at the elf, telling his ally that he should be protecting him at all costs. The elven warrior ignored the outburst, turning his sharp gaze towards Seowoon and noting that he didn't see an ally anywhere nearby. The archer didn't care about the observation, screaming for the elf to just kill Seowoon already. Seowoon wiped the blood from his chin, realizing that he should have killed the archer quickly to avoid this situation. He noted that a 2-on-1 battle was now inevitable. However, as he looked at the two of them, a smirk returned to his face. He told himself to wait a goddamn minute, realizing with a dark sense of humor that he was actually the one with the numbers on his side. The elven warrior leapt forward, his blade carving through the air with a sharp hiss as he launched a relentless assault. Jin Seowoon moved with fluid grace, narrowly avoiding the strike as he kept his eyes locked on his opponent. Behind the elf, the archer named Alex took aim, labeling Seowoon a slippery bastard for his evasive maneuvers. With a surge of red energy, Alex unleashed his triple shot skill, sending 3 arrows streaking across the cobblestones. The projectiles found their mark, tearing into Seowoon's back and causing him to grunt in pain. Alex grinned with a predatory confidence, boasting that since Seowoon was shot by him, it was over because he never missed. However, the archer's triumph was short-lived as he looked ahead and claimed he definitely had his target this time. Seowoon's voice cut through the air with cold disdain, calling the archer arrogant for his premature celebration. Before Alex could even process the movement, Seowoon appeared right in front of him. The archer stammered, asking how his opponent had managed such a feat, just as a hand wreathed in dark energy plunged into his chest. Alex let out a final, pained as he was struck down with lethal force. Standing over his fallen foe, Seowoon explained that just because eyes said he was in one place, it didn't mean he was actually there. A system notification chimed in the air, stating that the opponent had been knocked out and must be finished off with a final strike before a teammate could revive them. The elven warrior watched the scene unfold, concluding that Seowoon used strange magic and must be an illusionist. Seowoon scoffed at the assessment, telling the elf that whether he was an illusionist or whatever, he was just a returning student. He issued a challenge, stating that if the elf wanted to save his ally, he would have to take Seowoon down first. The elf's face twisted in rage as he vowed not only to take Seowoon down but to survive until the very end. He lunged forward, his body a blur of motion as he descended from the heights to unleash a double strike. Seowoon focused his mind, preparing a counter and reminding himself that the key was the point where the attack originated, necessitating a move to close in and aim straight for the shoulder. The impact sparked as the blade met Seowoon's defense, and the elf marveled at how fast his opponent truly was. The elf immediately activated his bloody rush skill, his blade trailing a path of red light as it slashed across Seowoon's torso. Seowoon winced as blood sprayed from the wound, realizing that a sword definitely felt different from a spear and that he had been sliced too deep. He knew that if he hadn't surrounded himself with inner energy, his arm and the rest of his body would have been sliced clean through. The elf looked surprised, noting it was strange that his sword hadn't cut as deeply as he had predicted. He assumed Seowoon was using another trick like the illusions from earlier. Seowoon, catching his breath despite the injury, replied that he wasn't really sure what happened, but it didn't matter. The elf bared his teeth in a savage grin, promising that Seowoon's neck would be the next target. Seowoon realized that if he couldn't finish the elf in one hit, he only had his counter technique left to rely on. He wondered how he could possibly counter the man's lightning-fast movements. He closed his eyes for a moment, remembering that this round didn't have any penalty for failing. Since there was no risk, he decided he should try something new. Instead of following his enemy with his eyes, he would try feeling the elf's energy and killing intent directly. He steeled himself, knowing that if he couldn't even overcome this obstacle, there was no way he could set his eyes on winning first place. The Seowoon who had practiced methods of using inner energy for 2 months was no longer the same person who had struggled after learning about inner energy from Jang Dochian for the first time. In fact, he was one of the very few who possessed a rare talent for manipulating that power. His eyes snapped open as a blur of motion approached, and the elf screamed in confusion and rage as Seowoon easily blocked his ultimate attack. Seowoon remained silent, feeling as though he had finally broken through a significant wall in his training. The elf begged for him to wait, but Seowoon showed no mercy as he delivered a crushing blow. A system message confirmed that Jin Seowoon had killed Karl Gurnier with brute force, and the player count dropped to 196. Seowoon noted to himself that strong guys like that certainly had a lot of inner energy for him to absorb. He found a treasure chest nearby and opened it, discovering a fair amount of farming loot. He spotted a recovery scroll among the items and decided to use it to heal his wounds before slowly starting to farm the rest of the area. After the healing magic took effect, he reflected on his performance, wondering why he had gotten so worked up and messed things up earlier. He inspected a damaged cloak of hiding, noting the system description that it had lost its function and required a craftsman or a special scroll to repair. He decided he might as well hold onto it for now. Next, he pulled out a lightning-struck cottonwood bow, which the system described as allowing the user to shoot arrows containing faint lightning energy. He felt a moment of confusion, as he hadn't felt any lightning from the arrows the previous archer was shooting at him. He then opened a multi-shot skill book, and the system asked if he would like to learn the ability to shoot multiple arrows at once. He realized the previous opponent wasn't originally an archer and had just learned how to use the bow while in the game. Seowoon decided he should try the skill out since he had learned it, and he drew the bowstring back. The arrows flew with incredible speed and power, leading him to conclude that this was way better than the crossbow he had picked up last time and would be pretty useful for sure. Seowoon observed that it seemed like there was only one team left in this region, but he chose to rest and farm for a bit before resuming his hunt. He searched through the village houses but found nothing but junk items, wondering why there weren't any more high-quality drops like the Cloak of Hiding. He looked toward the town center and realized that those kinds of places were usually the best farming points in the game. He entered a large tower, noting that since the door was closed, it didn't seem like anyone else had been there yet. He jokingly thought to himself that he should start a proper mukbang as he explored the quiet interior. He decided to close the door behind him just in case any intruders arrived. As he climbed the stairs, he hummed a small tune, wishing for something good to come out like another cloak of hiding or rings that raised his stats. He reached the top of the tower only to find the room completely empty. He stood by the window and sighed, disappointed that there was really nothing at all to find. He slammed his fist against the wall in frustration, shouting a curse as he looked out over the village. He grumbled that while sometimes everything went as planned in this game, sometimes it just pissed him off. Suddenly, he paused and looked down at the street below. He saw two players walking through the village, noting that they were farming without a care in the world. He wondered if they had anything good, thinking it might be hard to face them alone if they had some powerful items from the start. He debated how he should deal with them as he watched their movements. He wondered if they were thinking of coming to the tower. Below, a green-haired man smiled, pointing out to his partner that the door was closed. He claimed that the closed door definitely meant nobody had come there yet. His partner agreed, adding that finding a healing scroll right at the entrance was a good omen and a sign of a lucky start. Up in the tower, Seowoon realized he hadn't noticed the healing scroll at the entrance because there was so much junk around, but it had ended up being a very useful trap for these newcomers. He prepared to leap from the window, thinking that if they were at a level to get excited about a simple healing scroll, their items and skills were likely nothing to write home about. With a cold, sharp gaze, he told himself that if you see weaklings, you have to strike first. Falling from the heights of the tower, Jin Seowoon descended like a predator onto his unsuspecting prey. One of the men below looked up in shock, barely having time to register the shadow looming over him before Seowoon analyzed the situation, thinking that if the green-haired man was even a decent mage, he would surely have a barrier prepared. He lunged forward, his fist glowing with internal energy as he shattered the shimmering magical shield with a single, devastating blow. The mage gasped in terror, wondering where this attacker had suddenly come from, but Seowoon simply focused on his next movement, resolving to finish the fight with his very next attack. The mage desperately unleashed a powerful spell known as Escrow Dan Fire, and a massive wave of orange flames erupted to consume the alleyway. Seowoon reacted with incredible speed, leaving behind a fading afterimage as he dodged the initial strike. The axe-wielding warrior was caught in the blast of his own teammates' fire and screamed in rage, demanding to know what the mage was doing. The mage frantically explained that he hadn't been aiming for his partner and that an enemy had appeared, but the warrior cursed as he realized the magical flames simply would not go out. The two men paused, the warrior asking if their lone attacker was really by himself, noting that if he had a teammate, they likely would have attacked together. Seowoon suddenly manifested behind the armored man, his voice cold as he told the warrior that in this case, he simply had to die. The warrior swung his heavy weapon in a blind fury, calling Seowoon a slippery eel for his evasive movements. He shouted that he would kill the intruder, but as he swung, Seowoon ducked low. The heavy axe blade missed Seowoon and instead buried itself deep into the mage's chest with a sickening crunch. The mage looked down at the weapon in his torso, weakly asking his partner what he was trying to do right now. The warrior panicked, stammering that he didn't do it on purpose and that Seowoon had simply dodged the attack. The dying mage coughed up blood, telling his partner that he understood and to just get the axe off of him. Seowoon appeared behind the wounded mage and unleashed a shattering strike, coldly stating that he would take the finishing blow for himself. As the mage collapsed, the warrior muttered a curse, realizing his teammate was gone. He reached down and threw his heavy armor to the ground, declaring that he was taking his chest plate off. He glared at Seowoon, asking how he dared to mess with him. Seowoon watched the transformation, wondering if the man was the type that suffered from a weight debuff on his armor and if he was about to get a little faster. The warrior lunged with a powerful smash, but Seowoon met the attack in midair with a straight drop kick. The warrior groaned in pain as the kick connected, but he managed to grab Seowoon, mockingly stating that to come down from the air, one eventually had to land on the ground again. He slammed Seowoon into the stone of the clock tower, causing the young man's eyes to widen as blood sprayed from his mouth. Seowoon felt the impact rattling his bones, thinking that this man was really incredibly strong. Standing back up amidst the rubble, Seowoon asked if the warrior really thought he could catch him with just that brute strength. He told the man that strength was not everything, prompting the warrior to roar that they would see if Seowoon's mouth was still flapping when he died. Seowoon unleashed a penetrating strike that pierced right through the warrior's defense, mockingly noting that even an earthworm would writhe if stepped on. As the warrior struck at the figure before him, Seowoon's body dissolved into mist, and he told the idiot to have a good fight with his clone. The real Seowoon stood calmly at the doorway of the tower, and the warrior spun around in shock, asking when he had managed to get over there. Seowoon asked if he heard the groaning sound of the building, pointing out that the warrior had just split the tower in half with his own reckless power. He asked if the man was curious about what was going to happen next before delivering a powerful kick to the weakened structural pillars. The warrior screamed for someone to save him as he realized he had been fighting a fake, but it was too late as the entire stone tower collapsed on top of him with a deafening roar. Seowoon looked over the massive pile of rubble, wondering who would actually get credit for the kill in such a situation. He admitted to himself that he had only done it because it seemed like fun, but then realized that if he didn't get the official kill, his reward would decrease. He imagined the dead man cursing his name from beneath the stones, but his attention was quickly drawn to a loot chest that materialized a short distance away. He realized that if there was no space for a box to appear on a body, the system would simply place it nearby. He felt relieved, thinking he might have wasted a whole day digging through the rubble, and decided it was finally time for some farming. He pulled a pair of gloves of strength from the chest, noting they would slightly increase his power. He concluded that the gloves were all he could salvage from the big warrior, but he turned his attention to the mage's remains, calling the man a total golden goblin for the wealth of items he carried. He found a scroll that could explode, a cursed brooch, a philosopher's stone, and a fragmented manual which required 8 pieces to reveal its true name. Seowoon decided he had made too much of a commotion and that it was time to move on. He donned a mage's robe that blocked wind and rain, noting that while it had almost no defense, it was a useful layer. He observed that the restricted zone was slowly closing in and figured that since he started in an initial area, there should be quite a few players left on the other side of the map. He debated whether he should head for the center of the map first, noting that while he had looted the remaining civilian houses, there had been nothing left to salvage. He moved out before it got too late, traveling a long distance with his movement techniques. He felt a sense of pride, realizing he was moving at a significantly different speed than he had in his first game. A system tutorial window appeared, informing him that he had entered a monster spawning area and that these specific locations featured a variety of creatures, including boss monsters that dropped special items. Seowoon remarked that it wasn't just werewolves appearing now, but all sorts of creatures, and he wished the game had provided this information in his previous life. Another notification explained that in addition to regular and boss monsters, buff monsters existed to grant temporary power-ups to players. Seowoon spotted a massive, pterodactyl-like creature in the sky and asked himself if that was truly a monster. He watched from the shadows as 2 other players engaged a group of snake-like beasts. A man in dark robes told his partner he would hold the creatures in place and instructed the warrior to fight as defensively as possible. The warrior agreed, stating he would count on the mage's support. Seowoon observed them with interest, thinking that a warrior and mage combination was something he had never seen before. He drew his new lightning-struck bow, aiming at the pair and wondering if he should start this encounter by taking one of them out immediately.
Most people miss the real story. Subscribe if you want to see everything.
A high-pitched screech echoed through the air as several giant serpents bared their fangs. A heavy impact resounded as a shaggy-haired warrior struck one of the beasts, calling out the name of the 7-star sword technique as he swung his weapon. Beside him, a hooded mage summoned an ice lance to impale another of the monsters. The warrior noted that there were many of them, but he felt confident that they would soon catch them all and receive good rewards, encouraging his partner that they should cheer up together. The hooded mage, however, was clearly frustrated, asking if the warrior was the only one who could have it easy. He grumbled about how much mana he had to use just to catch one of the creatures while the 7-star sword technique flared with energy. As more ice shards cracked through the air, the mage suddenly let out a sharp gasp and flinched. He shouted in surprise, asking if that was an arrow that had just whistled past him. Realizing they were under attack, he yelled that it was a surprise attack and that someone was definitely targeting them. The warrior looked down with a grim expression, stating that rewards were not important right now and that the enemy was the priority, noting that there was not much of the battle left anyway. The mage panicked, screaming that they were about to die and demanding to know what the warrior was talking about as he insisted they run away quickly. High above on a cliff, Jin Seowoon watched through his bow's sight, wondering if he was witnessing a mutiny between the 2 companions. He toyed with the idea of poking them a little more just to see what would happen. Below, the mage saw more projectiles coming and cried out in terror. Magical ice shards shattered under the pressure of the incoming fire, and the mage let out a loud cry as his defenses crumbled. The warrior demanded that he hurry up and cast the barrier again, but the mage snapped back that he knew that already without being told. He channeled his magic into an escrow Dan barrier, though he worried that with so much destructive power coming at them, the shield would break again. He begged to run away quickly, but the warrior refused, arguing that if they fled now, they would end up losing all the rewards from the monsters they had fought. The warrior insisted that the loss would be too big and that they should hurry to finish the snakes and move on. The mage's frustration boiled over as he shouted that the barrier simply wouldn't work. Thinking quickly, he wondered if a different approach might save them and summoned an escrow Dan protect wall instead. A massive wall of earth and stone rose from the ground with a heavy crack, catching the warrior off guard. He shouted in confusion, demanding to know what the mage was doing right now as he looked at the massive pit and wall separating them from their surroundings. Seowoon observed the new fortification from his vantage point, wondering if the wall was the mage's doing and concluding that in this case, the situation was actually better for him. The mage explained his logic, claiming it was better to block the enemy like this than to keep wasting mana on a failing barrier, even if it meant they couldn't figure out the enemy's location. The warrior argued that the enemy wouldn't be able to get in by climbing over the wall anyway and asked if the mage was trying to advertise their exact position. As a snake bit at him, the warrior grumbled that they would just have to wait until the wall disappeared on its own. He threatened his partner, warning the mage that if he did something foolish again, he would be on his own regardless of their companionship. The mage suddenly looked up in absolute terror, pointing toward the sky as Seowoon looked down at them from the top of the wall. Seowoon remarked that a wall like this was completely useless against curving weapons like bows. The warrior realized Seowoon was right, his face pale as he asked if they could get rid of the wall immediately. The mage admitted that it would take about 5 minutes for the magic to dissipate. Seowoon pulled out a magic bomb scroll, which the system described as a device that would explode 10 seconds after use. He selected the option to use the item, and a countdown began from 10 to 9. He drew his bow as the timer hit 8 and 7, then loosed an arrow with the scroll attached. The countdown continued through 6 and 5, the arrow streaking toward the trapped pair. As the timer hit 4 and 3, the projectile curved over the wall, landing in the pit as the count hit 2 and 1. The targets stared at the bomb as the timer hit 0. The warrior barely had time to react before a massive explosion roared through the confined space. Seowoon watched the blast with interest, noting that the scroll's power was even stronger than he had thought. A pained screech rang out from a nearby snake, and Seowoon muttered that it was far too noisy. Amidst the smoke and rubble, the warrior groaned in pain. He cursed his blockhead of a partner, lamenting that he had almost died a meaningless death. As he looked up, his eyes widened in fear as he saw Seowoon approaching. Seowoon greeted him casually with a simple hello. He aimed his bow at the wounded man, remarking that since the mage was kind enough to trap them all inside, he had managed to get an easy win. Seowoon wondered to himself if he should actually thank them for the help. He laughed, noting that having an eye for choosing good companions was also a skill in this game. He told the man that he still had a long way to go before loosed the final shot. A spray of blood signaled the end of the warrior, and Seowoon noticed that a loot box appeared immediately. He realized the mage must have been caught in the initial explosion and died instantly. Seowoon opened the box and found the book of the 7-star mind technique, the fundamental manual for the sword style he had just witnessed. He noted that the set included the sword technique, movement technique, and footwork. The system asked if he wanted to replace his 100 Void Communion with this new skill, but Seowoon declined, thinking to himself that these were all useless martial arts for his specific needs. However, he noted that he didn't get nothing of value. He pulled out Toha's ring, which significantly increased magic resistance. He wondered if this ring was the reason the warrior had been able to endure the explosion alone while his partner died. He searched the debris further and found the mage's loot box, which made his eyes light up. He called it a jackpot as he pulled out Asher's necklace, a piece made of pure gold with no special abilities, and a magic book for Ice Lance. He noted the book contained Circle 4 magic that could freeze and damage targets, but concluded it was too high level for him to learn right now. A low growl rumbled nearby, and Seowoon turned to see a snake approaching, but he simply looked on with a focused gaze. A little later, Seowoon stood over the carcasses of numerous giant serpents, wondering why the other players had struggled so much against guys like these. He spotted more loot bags on the ground, questioning if these were rewards for hunting the monsters. He found Lamia's tears, used for magic experiments and item creation, and Tyrone's necklace, which slightly increased his agility. He decided the necklace wasn't bad but was unsure what to do with the tears. Seowoon sat down to meditate, reflecting that the buff a boss monster gives might be large enough to change the entire course of a battle. He decided it would be helpful to catch such a creature as quickly as possible, but realized there were two things to consider: whether he had the ability to hunt one and if other players were thinking the same thing. A system notification announced the start of Day 2 of Cloyd's Survival. Out of the original 200 players, 139 remained, meaning 60 people had been eliminated in a single day. Seowoon checked his stats and saw he had 8 kills, which he considered a decent start. He decided to move toward the center of the map where the first ping had appeared. He remembered that the weather had been quite nice during his first game, but now he found himself in a blistering desert. He complained about the heat and wondered if he should have waited to move until after the sun went down. Suddenly, a shadow passed over him, and he looked up to see a massive bird flying through the sky. He guessed that it might be a supply item, and his suspicions were confirmed as the bird dropped a large chest. He sprinted toward the landing site as the system informed him he had obtained a Cloyd's treasure box. Seowoon inspected the chest, but a system warning appeared, stating that if he obtained the treasure, his location would be revealed with a red light once every 30 minutes for 6 hours. The system prompted him to decide if he wanted to claim it. Seowoon paused, considering the risk. He ultimately decided that since there was no risk of elimination anyway, he could afford to take a gamble like this. He placed his hands on the heavy lid and pushed it open. A blinding light erupted from the chest, bathing Seowoon in its glow as he prepared for whatever the reward might be. Dear viewers, starting from here, this series is being translated from different source. Please be aware that there may be slight discrepancies in names and terminology. We appreciate your patience and thank you for your continued support. Jin Seowoon reached out and opened the heavy treasure chest with a metallic click. As the lid swung open, a brilliant light erupted from within, but his face fell as he realized the game was already broadcasting his location to every player in the vicinity. He realized with frustration that he hadn't even checked the items yet, and the chest was already giving away his position. He knew he had to grab the loot and get out of there as fast as humanly possible. His eyes widened as he scanned the rewards. The system displayed a cloak of hiding, a rare item that allowed the wearer to vanish into the shadows. Next was a red cloud pill, a spiritual elixir that boosted inner energy but carried the heavy penalty of rendering the user immobile for 10 hours after consumption. He also found a circle stone for Circle 4, which allowed a user to master high-level magic but left them paralyzed for 3 hours. Alongside these were a Windblade Grimoire and a Cloud Stride martial arts manual, a technique that allowed one to run like the wind with speed that scaled with the user's internal energy. Seowoon tucked the items away, noting that the cloak of hiding was totally useless in the bright daylight. He realized he couldn't use the elixir or the circle stone right away because of the immobilization risks. However, he steeled his resolve, knowing that if he could just survive for 6 hours, the payoff would make him a top-tier survivor. For now, he decided to learn the Cloud Stride technique to facilitate a quick escape. He activated the skill, feeling the energy surge into his legs as he began to run like the wind. His boots kicked up dust as he blurred across the desert landscape. Suddenly, he sensed danger and noted that enemies were approaching from behind. He could tell they were still some distance away, but he remained cautious. He felt confident in his own speed, but he didn't know what kind of specialized techniques they might use to chase him. He decided to leave some bait behind, wondering if they would fall for the trap. He watched from a distance as a knight in golden plate armor and a hooded mage approached the empty treasure box. The knight noted that they had started chasing the light as soon as they saw it and figured the thief hadn't gone very far yet. The hooded mage used his detection magic, searching the area but reporting that he couldn't sense anything within the range of his spell yet. The mage spotted an item on the ground, a red gem known as the Tears of Lamia, which was a material used for magic experiments and crafting. The knight concluded that the target must have grabbed the main items and ran off in a hurry. He pointed in a direction, suggesting they head that way. The mage agreed, telling the knight to leave the magic to him and to keep an eye out for any traces. Seowoon watched them from his hiding spot with a smirk, thinking they were so easy for falling for his ruse perfectly. He knew he needed to put as much distance between them as possible before the next 30-minute location ping. 30 minutes later, Seowoon sat against a dead tree, catching his breath with a tired phew. His relief was short-lived as he began to count the presences closing in on him. His heart sank as he realized the number of enemies had suddenly increased. They weren't super close yet, but they weren't that far away either. He wondered if more parties had gathered toward the center of the map. Suddenly, a pillar of light erupted from his body as the system broadcasted his location again. He cursed his luck, shouting that it had to happen at the worst possible time. He realized the situation was becoming very bad as the sky above him began to rain fire. Explosions shattered the ground around him, and he shouted in alarm as he dodged the incoming spells. He activated Cloud Stride once more, but he noticed with a sense of dread that the pursuers were catching up at an insane speed. He wondered if they were using some kind of high-level movement technique of their own. A powerful neighing sound echoed through the flames, and Seowoon's eyes widened as a horse galloped through the fire. He was shocked to see a knight in full plate armor mounted on a beast that seemed unbothered by the heat. Another fireball streaked toward him as the mage shouted the name of the spell, Escrow's Flameball. Seowoon realized with a grimace that they were both riding horses, which explained their incredible pace. The mage called out for a strike, and Seowoon quickly used his martial phantom step to create an afterimage. The knight's horse tore through the illusory image, and the armored man hissed in annoyance. He called the technique odd and commanded his partner to chase Seowoon down and kill him at once. The knight leveled a heavy spear and threw it with lethal force. The projectile whistled through the air, and Seowoon gasped as it pierced through his cloak. He was stunned that they had already seen through his real body despite his illusions. Blood sprayed as the spear grazed him, and Seowoon gritted his teeth against the pain. He managed to catch the spear mid-flight, deciding he needed to concentrate his inner energy and throw it back. With a roar of die, he launched the spear at the knight. The projectile streaked across the desert with a flash of blue energy. The armored man groaned, complaining that his expensive armor had been damaged. He warned his partner to be careful, stating that Seowoon was no ordinary opponent. The mage looked intimidated, stammering that Seowoon looked strong and that they would be at a disadvantage if he had any hidden allies. Seowoon's attention was suddenly drawn elsewhere as he realized someone else was there. 2 arrows hissed through the air, and he narrowly avoided the surprise attack. The arrows found a different target, sinking deep into the knight's horse. The knight shouted in despair as his mount was struck. Seowoon watched the animal collapse, wondering if another duo was joining the fray. On a nearby cliff, 2 hooded archers loosed more arrows, cold voices declaring that there was no escape for anyone left in the valley. Standing in the middle of the desolate landscape, Jin Seowoon realized that he was so focused on the pursuers that he didn't notice the other presence closing in. Knowing that getting caught in a pincer attack was the worst-case scenario for any survivor. On the ridge, the lead archer commanded his partner to fire at the slightest movement Seowoon made, and the second elf confirmed he had the target in his sights. The knight, observing the new arrivals, spat out a curse and noted that it looked like flies were swarming into the area. His teammate, the hooded mage, felt the pressure and frantically asked what they should do now that they were surrounded. Seowoon looked up at the archers and mocked them, asking what had happened to the confidence they had displayed earlier and if they were actually scared now. He pointed out that they already knew the reality of their situation. The 2 teams of pursuers stared each other down, the tension thick enough to cut. The knight declared that at this point, 2 out of these 3 teams were going to have to die. Seowoon analyzed the battlefield, deducing that given the situation, both teams probably wanted to get him on their side so they could take out the other group first. He realized that if they took him down immediately, the remaining groups would be forced into a 2 versus 2 fight with no guarantee of victory, so they likely planned to use him to tilt the odds before finishing him off last. Seowoon felt the energy of his rings humming as he wondered how they would make their first move. The knight, losing his patience, gripped his weapon and roared that it didn't matter if there were 3 or 2 of them, and he challenged them all to come at him at once. His mage partner tried to calm him down, stuttering that there was no need to provoke the enemy like that, but the knight ignored him. He yelled at the others to get lost if they didn't want to get skewered, promising to let them off just this once. Seowoon watched the display and mused that the knight certainly had some guts, though he clearly didn't have much in the way of brains. The elven archer narrowed his eyes, stating coldly that there was no way they were letting anyone from the kingdom walk out of here alive. The elf then turned his attention to Seowoon, offering a deal where he would spare Seowoon's life if he chose to side with them. Seowoon noted with surprise that he was facing an actual elf, and he reflected on how this world was clearly full of ancient grudges he hadn't even heard of yet. As he pondered what the right move should be, the knight desperately chimed in, asking if Seowoon would join their side instead. The hooded mage's eyes widened in shock as Seowoon reached into his storage and pulled out a shimmering blue orb. Seowoon explained to the mage that if he truly was a practitioner of the craft, he should know exactly how valuable a circle stone was. Holding up the 4th circle stone, Seowoon noted that this was a pretty big deal for them and that they could easily sell it for a fortune. As both teams watched with greed in their eyes, Seowoon laid out his proposal while standing in the middle of the valley. He placed the glowing orb on the ground between the 2 parties and announced that the team that won the upcoming fight would get to keep it. He claimed that this arrangement was way more fair than him simply picking a side. As the elf steeled himself and the knight prepared for combat, Seowoon called out for them to fight. As soon as the 2 teams clashed in a flurry of steel and magic, Seowoon turned and sprinted away. He knew there was no way anyone had the time to actually use a circle stone within the 6-hour window anyway. To him, using a useless item to stall 4 powerful people at once was a very small price to pay. Activating his cloud stride technique, Seowoon blurred across the desert, confident that whoever survived the brawl would eventually come after him, at which point he would simply take his item back. He checked the system time and groaned, realizing there were still 5 long hours left in the challenge. A few minutes later, he reached the center of the map where he had placed his pin. He looked down into a massive ravine, noting that the valley was much deeper than he had expected and feeling that a boss monster could show up at any moment. Suddenly, a pillar of red light erupted from his position as the 30-minute timer expired. He let out a tired sigh, realizing the system was broadcasting his location once again. Before he could move, a voice from above called out the beginning of a spell, and the air turned to liquid fire. The words Escrow's flame echoed through the canyon as a massive explosion of heat washed over Seowoon. He felt a powerful chi in the air and realized with a start that the knight and mage he had shook off earlier had somehow found him. He wondered how they could have possibly caught up so fast. Perched on a cliff, the hooded mage told Seowoon that his little tricks had bought him some time but that it all ended now. The mage unleashed his phoenix strike, and a bird of pure fire descended with a deafening roar. Seowoon quickly channeled his internal energy into a martial phantom step to evade the direct hit, but the resulting explosion was massive. He let out a pained scream of GWAH as the shockwave and flame slammed into him, sending him tumbling into the darkness of the deep ravine. High above, the knight looked into the smoking abyss and complained that now they wouldn't even be able to loot the body. The mage stood by his side, wondering if he should have held back a little more but ultimately concluding that Seowoon was probably dead anyway. The knight suggested they leave before the pillar of light drew a crowd of other players. When the knight asked if they were really leaving without his items, the mage replied that he already had rare gear and didn't really care. He looked down at his own chain sword, a high-powered blade that could be wielded like a whip to dominate long-range combat. A masked mage whispered that it was too bad he was still lacking proper gear and that he would love to break the knight's nose right then and there. He told his partner to wait while he checked the bottom of the ravine with levitation magic. His partner, a knight in a T-shaped visor, refused to let him go alone since they didn't know what treasure was down there. When the masked mage asked how the knight planned to get down, the warrior insisted he would figure something out. The knight tied a thick rope around his waist and prepared to climb down as the mage floated nearby in a magical bubble. The mage warned the knight that if he fell, the rope would be cut immediately, prompting the knight to ask what the point of the rope even was. The warrior begged him not to cut it, but the mage simply said they would see. The knight grumbled that they were supposed to be teammates and asked for some faith. The mage focused on his levitation magic, a spell so risky it was often called the suicide spell among practitioners. He knew that only a handful of high-level mages could cast other spells while floating, meaning he was completely defenseless while in the air. As they descended, the mage noted they were almost to the bottom. The knight, swinging on the rope, cried out that it was easy for the mage to say while his own life was flashing before his eyes. The mage reminded him that he was the one who insisted on coming. Suddenly, a sharp sound echoed as the rope was sliced through. The knight let out a terrified wah as he plummeted into the dark. The mage screamed as he was pulled into the darkness, and a spray of blood coated the rope. The warrior hit the bottom with a massive splash, surprised to find a pool of water at the base of the ravine. He stood up and complained about all the effort it took to get down there, but his relief turned to terror as another splash sounded nearby. The knight froze in absolute horror, his mind racing as he wondered who could have possibly killed a mage that quickly. Standing in the shallow water at the bottom of the ravine, the knight in the metal visor looked up in absolute shock. He wondered to himself if the guy from earlier was actually still alive, his eyes widening behind the slits of his helmet. Aoyama Haruto stood before him, his expression cold and focused as he prepared his next move. The knight recoiled as Haruto called out the name of his bone shatter strike, a crimson aura of energy erupting from his body. The knight swung his longsword with a desperate roar, shouting that there was no way he was going to die that easily. The knight activated the mechanism of his weapon, commanding his chain sword to extend. The blade segmented with a metallic rasp, becoming a long, whip-like chain that lashed through the air. Haruto was momentarily caught off guard by the weapon's range but reached out and grabbed the moving chain with his bare hand. He thought to himself that it was a truly pesky weapon to have to deal with. The sharp edges of the segments bit into his palm, sending a spray of blood into the water, but Haruto didn't let go. He used the chain to pull himself forward, leaping into the air and grabbing the knight by his helmet. Looking the terrified man in the eye, Haruto told him that if he wasn't prepared to die, then he should never have come after him in the first place. He shoved the knight down into the dark water, pinning him to the bottom with irresistible force. Haruto focused his power and called for an inner energy release, and a burst of blue electricity surged through the water. The knight struggled frantically, his voice coming out as a series of muffled gurgles as he begged for Haruto to wait and forgive him just this once. His plea was silenced by a final cry of pain as the energy consumed him. A system notification appeared, confirming that Aoyama Haruto had killed Kelly Carl with his fist arts and had eliminated Davidson with a burst of arm energy. Standing alone in the pool, Haruto let out a weary breath as his eyes fell on two loot chests floating on the surface. He sighed, wondering why the boxes were so incredibly heavy as he dragged them to the shore. He decided he should probably avoid fighting underwater in the future. Haruto opened the chests and found a fire orb capable of launching a sealed fire spell and a Circle 4 Phoenix Strike manual. He noted that the circle requirement for the spell was too high for him to learn yet, concluding that the mage he had killed must have been quite strong to possess it. He reflected that the battle could have been much tougher if the mage hadn't been completely defenseless while using his levitation magic. He then turned his attention to the whip-like chain sword, a high-powered blade designed to dominate long-range combat. Despite not having any specific swordsmanship skills, he decided to take the weapon anyway. Suddenly, he sensed movement and heard the sound of footsteps approaching from above. A player in purple robes noted that the pillar of light had been seen around this area, and his partner in a green hood suggested they might be a bit late. As they looked down at the empty, glowing chests, the man in purple wondered if anything was left. The green-hooded man replied that there was no way anything valuable remained. Haruto struck from the shadows, his fist glowing with blue energy as he launched a surprise attack. He felt like a god in the darkness as long as he had the cloak of hiding to mask his presence. A few hours later, the system announced that the final positions of all survivors would now be displayed. Haruto was panting for breath, his chest heaving as he called his fallen enemies damn weaklings and admitted he was getting a bit carried away with his hunting. The system showed that only 101 survivors remained out of the original 200. Suddenly, Haruto sensed a presence and caught an arrow out of the air with his bare hand. He looked up to the cliff and saw the two elven archers watching him. One of the elves was shocked, asking his partner if that guy was the one who had run off earlier. Haruto looked at them with a cold smile and asked if they were the final winners of the earlier fight. He moved with a sudden burst of violence, and the system count dropped to 99 survivors. Haruto looted the bodies and found Tokar's rings, realizing they were the reason the elves had won their previous battle. He smirked, thinking he was lucky because one could never have too many of these rings. He noted his 6-hour handicap was finally over and pulled out the Circle 4 stone and the Red Cloud pill. He decided he needed to find a safe place to hide and boost his stats. A few minutes later, he found a secluded cave and let out a relieved sigh as he finally sat down. Haruto reflected that using the Circle Stone and the elixir would take at least 6 hours. He wondered when the last time he had actually rested was, as running all day made the time feel like an eternity. He drank the purple elixir and waited. 6 hours later, Haruto felt his body adjusting to the massive power from both items. He stepped out of the cave into the night, thinking the darkness would only play to his advantage. His status window updated, showing his name as Aoyama Haruto, a human martial artist and mage with 310 units of inner energy and Circle 4 mana. His strength was now 50, his stamina 35, and his agility 42. He concluded this was the best way to increase his energy, though compared to his memories of the first game, this was still nothing. He thought about how he wished he could absorb Namjaku's energy again. He looked across the dark plain and saw movement, realizing there were still people left to hunt over there. He licked his lips as a dark hunger took hold of him, thinking that everyone in his sight now looked like prey. He felt like he could not lose at all as he jumped back into the fray. The hunting continued until sunrise. A notification marked the start of the third day of Cloyd's survival. Haruto sat on a chest and checked the player count, seeing 42 survivors left out of 100. He was shocked that in only 3 days, the population had dropped so low. The system then announced the locations of boss and buff monsters. Haruto saw a nearby marker and decided to check it out, knowing the fighting would only get more intense as numbers dwindled. However, when he arrived, he gasped in shock. He asked himself if the buff monster was a dragon or a giant snake. A massive, scaly beast rumbled with a low growl from the base of the cliffs. As the monster opened a singular, glowing yellow eye, Haruto realized that duos weren't enough and that it would take at least 6 full parties to beat something of this scale. A giant blue-scaled cobra loomed over the valley, its hood flared as it let out a long, menacing hiss. Aoyama Haruto stood before the massive creature, thinking to himself that he had originally expected to face something only slightly bigger than a werewolf. Looking at the scale of the beast, he realized that if the game expected a duo to hunt this, they were mistaken, as a monster of this size would require at least 5 or 6 coordinated parties to take down. The serpent let out a deafening shriek that echoed off the canyon walls, but as Haruto steeled himself for an attack, his eyes widened in surprise. He felt the ground stop trembling as the creature suddenly became still. He wondered why the monster had suddenly calmed down, theorizing that perhaps it only attacked players who entered a specific range. That explanation made sense to him, as something that massive being active at all times would be impossible for any player to take on. He decided to leave the beast alone for now, quietly telling himself that it wasn't like he was actually scared or anything. A few minutes later, Haruto walked through a dense forest at a much more relaxed pace, munching on a small snack. He wondered if everyone was already playing it safe after only 3 days of survival, noting that he hadn't run into a single person on the way here. He suddenly sensed a presence in the foliage and reacted instinctively. Calling out for a wind blade, he unleashed a wave of sharp air that sliced through the bushes. A high-pitched scream of agony rang out, and Haruto froze, realizing he had just heard a kid's voice. He carefully peered through the trees and saw a small, dirty boy huddled on the ground. The boy looked up and whispered a trembling apology. Haruto was stunned, confirming to himself that it really was a child standing there. He stared at the boy, finding it hard to believe his eyes, when a shadow suddenly loomed behind him. A man with long, dark hair lunged out of the trees with a sword raised high, demanding to know how old Haruto was. Haruto moved with blinding speed, ducking under the blade just as the attacker cursed, realized he had missed his target. Haruto didn't hesitate, delivering a powerful punch to the man's gut that sent him reeling. The attacker let out a pained groan and spat on the ground as Haruto watched him with a cold gaze, thinking that this was exactly what he had suspected. He realized that this was a duo using a kid as bait to lower an opponent's guard before striking from behind. The man groaned in frustration as Haruto stood over him. Haruto looked back at the boy and saw that his small body was covered in deep wounds that had clearly been healed repeatedly using scrolls. Turning back to the man, Haruto told him that he was the lowest scum he had met in this entire game. The attacker grumbled that Haruto was stronger than he had expected but pulled out a glowing red orb. He claimed that as long as he killed Haruto, all of the young man's power would become his. He threw the fire orb, watching as a massive fireball erupted to consume the path. The man laughed to himself, mocking Haruto for being burnt to a crisp by an item he had taken from some naive mage. However, Haruto walked out of the smoke completely unharmed. He asked the man if he relied so heavily on items because he simply lacked any actual skill. He looked the man in the eye and stated that if the attacker really thought an item like that would beat him, he was deeply disappointed. A system notification appeared, showing that Aoyama Haruto possessed a magic resistance of 90. The man's face twisted in disbelief, stammering that it was a Circle 3 spell and demanding to know how Haruto wasn't even singed. Before he could finish his thought, Haruto's fist slammed into his face. The man let out a sharp goo of pain as Haruto grabbed him by the jaw. The man begged him to stop, crying out that it hurt, but Haruto remained indifferent. He told the man that it wasn't like people actually died for real in this world, so it didn't matter. He leaned in closer, whispering that compared to what the man had made that kid go through, he deserved to suffer way more before he was eliminated. Haruto squeezed with bone-crushing force, and the man let out a final, soul-piercing scream of agony before his body dissolved into light. Nearby, the young boy huddled in the grass, sobbing for his mother. Haruto approached and called out to the kid. The boy flinched, answering with a terrified yes. Haruto asked him how old he was and what his name was. The boy stammered that he was 9 and that his name was Lyle. Haruto looked at him with a softened gaze, thinking that whether it was good or bad luck, ending up in a death game at that age was a heavy burden. He asked Lyle if this was his first game, and the boy replied that he was just on his way home when everything suddenly changed. Haruto decided he couldn't just leave the boy like this and reached into his pack to give him a hand. Lyle asked what the items were as Haruto handed over a Circle 4 stone and a bag of jerky. Haruto explained that he was already at Circle 4 and didn't need the stone, noting that there weren't many strong players left so a Circle 3 boost should be enough to help the boy survive. He told Lyle that as long as he stayed alive, being brought here could eventually become a huge opportunity for him. He told the boy to do his best to live and said goodbye as he walked away. Lyle stood in the forest, clutching the items and shouting a tearful thank you. As Haruto walked, he reflected on how he wasn't much different from that kid just 2 months ago. He wondered how old man Jang Dogton was doing, acknowledging that without his mentor's guidance, he would have been eliminated from Cloyd Survival a long time ago. A system chime interrupted his thoughts, and his eyes widened as a message appeared. The notification announced that the duo of Hayami Ren and Drift had given up on hunting the boss monster. Haruto repeated the name Hayami Ren, remembering the smug high schooler he had seen back in the lobby. He deduced that if they had just finished a fight, they would likely be exhausted, and he resolved to finish them off before they had a chance to recover. He checked his map and followed the trail, eventually reaching a clearing where he found them. He looked out over a massive tangle of roots and wondered if that was the corpse of the boss monster. From the shadows, he heard a group of survivors arguing. A warrior from the Thistle Kingdom told a group of Imperial folks that this was not what they had originally agreed on. He reminded them that they had agreed not to fight within the boss area, but an older knight replied that the deal was only valid before the boss was defeated. The knight accused the Thistle warriors of stealing the final hit and asked how they had the nerve to speak of agreements now. The Thistle warrior sighed, calling the Imperial folks narrow-minded and telling them to come at him all at once. He declared that the warriors of Thistle did not care about numbers. From the back of the group, a hooded figure mocked the group for preaching about honor when they were so willing to team up whenever it suited them. Hyami Ren stepped forward from the shadows with a devious smile, telling the woman warrior not to mock those who had fought alongside her until the end. He argued that the only thing that mattered was the winnings they gained here. As the Thistle warrior stared him down, Ren asked if she was willing to split the rewards. She replied that there was barely anything left to go around and asked if he still expected a split. Ren watched her with a cold expression, realizing there was only one way left to settle this. She raised her hands as they began to glow, declaring that from this moment on, she would kill every one of them with everything she had. Haruto watched the scene from the bushes, thinking it was a shame he didn't have any popcorn because this was about to be a good show. Suddenly, a shadow fell over Haruto's hiding spot. Ren's voice called out into the woods, asking why Haruto wouldn't just come out already. The other warriors looked confused, wondering who the man was talking about. Ren shouted Haruto's name, stating that he knew Aoyama Haruto could hear him and that hiding was completely pointless. Ren bared his teeth in a malicious grin as he looked toward Haruto's position. Haruto narrowed his eyes, looking back at the smug student and thinking to himself that he was a truly disgusting bastard. Standing tall above the fray, Hyami Ren called out into the shadows, demanding that Aoyama Haruto finally show himself. The warriors gathered in the clearing whispered the name in shock, wondering if the legendary top killer of the game was truly present. Ren continued his taunting, reminding the unseen Haruto that he had promised to help their group if they handed over the ant's heart. Reaching into the shimmering purple rift of his storage, Ren pulled out a glowing, wrapped item and threatened that if Haruto did not come out immediately, he would simply give the treasure to the other teams instead. Hiding within the dense foliage, Haruto watched the display with narrowed eyes, thinking to himself that the brat was clearly bluffing and was being quite sly by using his name in such a way. The warriors of the rival teams gaped at the object, realizing it was indeed the ant's heart and noting that with a reward that valuable, one could easily buy an entire castle. Haruto reflected that anyone who had been paying attention to the kill log would know his name since he was currently the top killer, and he realized Ren was completely playing the groups against each other by using the boss reward as a weapon. Ren let out a mocking laugh and dropped the bag onto the dirt, shouting for Haruto to feel free to kill or rob these people however he liked. He claimed he had kept his end of the bargain as he knelt down. The warriors were stunned that he had dropped something so valuable so casually, and the woman leading the Imperial group urged everyone not to panic. Ren smirked as the woman promised to split the reward evenly among them, but her authority was quickly undermined by a warrior named Drift, who shouted that they first needed to chase Ren's team down. Ren and his partner immediately turned and sprinted away into the forest. One of the warriors argued that Ren was obviously just bluffing to steal the reward for himself and suggested they open the bag to check the contents first. Drift continued his pursuit as the group descended into a perfectly disorganized mob, with men shouting for others to move out of the way so they could see the heart for themselves. The woman warrior gritted her teeth in frustration, wondering how they were supposed to fight alongside a group of uncoordinated fools. As she prepared her magic, a blue pulse of energy rippled through the clearing. Watching from the trees, Haruto noted that the mages were completely fixated on the fake prize and mused that the alliance had fallen apart far more easily than he had expected. He decided it was finally time for him to have some fun as well. Further into the woods, one of the pursuers called out to Ren, asking how much longer he planned to keep running. Ren replied that this kind of fleeing just wasn't his style and that his body was itching for a fight. He decided it was time to take the situation seriously and signaled to Drift. Ren explained that they would launch a counterattack using a planned formation as soon as he gave the word. Drift grinned, stating that he had been waiting to hear those words. The woman warrior paused in confusion as Ren looked back and told Drift that he would leave the woman to him. Ren leapt onto a high branch, laughing that he was going to enjoy this to the fullest. He declared that he would handle the rest of the mob and channeled a massive surge of electricity through his staff. Shouting the name of his spell, Chain Lightning, he unleashed a web of golden bolts that slammed into the gathered warriors. Screams of agony erupted as the men were struck down. The woman warrior stared in disbelief, wondering how he could suppress so many people with just a single spell. Drift suddenly loomed over her, calling out to her and warning that if she kept looking away, she was going to get hurt. He swung his massive hammer in a devastating smash, but the woman met the attack with her hands glowing. She invoked her ice-sealing magic, and a burst of frost blocked the blow. Drift noted with surprise that his hammer was suddenly covered in ice and cursed her for using such a troublesome technique. He lunged forward again with a roar of die, but the woman stayed focused, whispering for the cold to turn everything into frost. Drift was shocked when his attack was frozen in place. Ren watched the scene from above, his eyes widening as he realized the woman was redirecting his electricity directly into the ground. He wondered if she had been hiding her true ability all along. She explained that by coating her body with inner energy and controlling the flow of qi, she could reduce the damage and move the current away from herself. She claimed that while it required advanced control, it was nothing difficult for her and told Ren she had seen through all of his tricks. Ren snarled that he would eliminate her himself and cast chain lightning once more. The woman stated that the move wouldn't work anymore and channeled the magic into a nearby tree. Ren was stunned, noting it was the first time he had seen someone nullify magic in that way. Realizing his spells were failing, he decided they would have to settle the fight through close combat. He drew a long sword from his cloak and lunged from the branch, clashing steel with her in a shower of sparks. She was shocked that a mage was also capable of using martial arts. A system notification appeared, announcing that an ally named Pike was defeated by Haruto. The woman stared at the message in shock, and Ren used the distraction to press his attack. She muttered a curse as she dodged, while Drift stood nearby and told her that this was the end, telling her to just die in peace. She admitted she had underestimated them and identified Haruto as the man who had defeated her comrade. Suddenly, an arrow tore through the air and slammed into Drift's arm. He shouted in pain and confusion, wondering if someone else had interfered. Haruto emerged from the shadows with his bow drawn, telling the group that they had some nerve using his name like that. Ren stared in shock, realizing that the real Aoyama Haruto had finally arrived. Haruto asked if Ren had called him out without knowing the consequences and demanded that he hand over the ant's heart. Ren replied that he had already used it as a decoy and asked if Haruto hadn't been watching nearby. Haruto aimed his arrow at Ren's face, asking if he was trying to mess with him. Haruto revealed that he had noticed Ren's trick of enchanting an empty bag. He decided he would just kill both of them to confirm the truth for himself. Drift struggled to his feet, telling Haruto not to underestimate a warrior of Thistle and claiming a bow user like him was easy prey. He lunged with his hammer, but Haruto struck him with a powerful smash that sent him crashing to the dirt. Haruto noted that he was weak despite talking so big. A system notification confirmed that Drift was defeated by Haruto. Ren looked on with a trembling voice, asking Haruto how many times he had done the Cloyd Survival. Haruto asked if he meant the lottery, but Ren clarified his question. Haruto calmly replied that this was only his second time. Ren was stunned and told Haruto not to get cocky just because it was his second round. Ren unleashed a final chain lightning, but Haruto loosed an arrow and called him an idiot. The projectile pierced Ren's chest with a sickening thud, and he collapsed into the grass. Haruto reflected that he might have been a bit too cold, considering he had finally met someone from the same world as him. A final system message appeared, confirming that Aoyama Haruto had killed Hayami Ren with his bow. Walking away from the fallen body of the high schooler, Aoyama Haruto reflected that he might have been a bit too cold, considering he had finally met someone from the same world as his own. He watched as a green light swirled around two loot chests that appeared in the grass. He noted that the boy had possessed more spirit than he initially thought, realizing that while he appeared to be just a mage, he clearly had some level of martial arts training under his belt. As Haruto stared into the trees, he wondered if there was any chance he would run into someone else from the real world again. He knelt by one of the chests and pried it open with a metallic click. He gasped in surprise, asking himself what he had found as he pulled out a glowing cube. The system informed him that he had obtained a golden weapon box, a rare item that only dropped from specific monsters and granted a random special weapon upon opening. He looked at the shimmering cube, noting that the previous owner had something this good and still managed to get killed without using it. Despite the circumstances, he decided he would gladly make use of the super rare drop. As the cube began to glow with an intense, golden light, Haruto squinted against the radiance. His eyes widened and he stammered that this was truly something special. However, as the light faded, the system congratulated him on obtaining a selfish hammock. Haruto stared at the small, round blue creature with wings and wondered if he had actually just pulled a dud. He had been expecting a more decent weapon like a sword or a bow and concluded that today simply was not his lucky day. He reached out to grab the creature, deciding he would just toss it into his subspace storage for the time being. Suddenly, a deep voice echoed from the creature, asking if Haruto was its new master. Haruto recoiled in shock, demanding to know what was happening. The small blue orb erupted into a massive surge of purple and blue energy, transforming into a towering, horned demon spirit. The entity boasted that to think Haruto had pulled him, the Great Hammet, meant he must be incredibly lucky. The system identified the being as the weapon spirit Elsius Hammet. Haruto looked at the massive spirit and asked if he was expected to fight for him instead of being a creepy piece of scrap metal. Hammet corrected him, explaining that he was a weapon that could transform into whatever form Haruto desired. He seemed offended by Haruto's lack of excitement, noting that normally people would scream in joy or cry tears of happiness upon obtaining him. The spirit asked what kind of weapon Haruto used, promising that whatever it was, he would surpass it and become the ultimate weapon for him. Haruto looked up at the giant and admitted that he didn't really use weapons. Hammett was stunned, shouting in disbelief that his master was a bare-handed fighter. The spirit quickly regained his composure, noting that there were weapons for fighters as well. The blue creature dissolved into light and reformed around Haruto's hand. Hammett laughed triumphantly, presenting a dazzling and flawless form. Haruto looked at the heavy gold gauntlet that the system described as capable of withstanding flames and shattering anything with its might. He shook his head, stating that it was heavy and hard to use, noting that it would only get in the way when he tried to draw his bow. Hammett sighed, realizing Haruto didn't like heavy or restrictive gear. He adjusted the form once more, creating dark gauntlets with freedom of movement and flexibility to match Haruto's preferences. Haruto inspected the new black gloves but noted that he didn't usually use stuff like this, so it still felt weird. Hammett screamed in frustration, asking why his master was so picky. Haruto ignored the outburst and told the spirit he was putting him in the subspace storage anyway. Hammett panicked as he was pulled toward the purple rift, shouting for Haruto to wait. He insisted that he was not an object to be handled so carelessly and begged Haruto to just tell him what kind of weapon he actually wanted. Haruto paused to think, considering a durable piece of cloth that he could use however he wanted. Hammett roared in anger, asking if Haruto was really telling the great Hammett to become a mere rag. Haruto told him that if he had a problem with it, he should just go hide in the subspace. The spirit relented and transformed with a bright flash. Haruto looked at his hands and admitted that this version wasn't half bad. Hammett complained that it was definitely bad and that the miserable form didn't suit him at all. As Haruto began to wrap the blue fabric around his knuckles, Hammett asked if he had any idea how many people had bled trying to obtain him. Haruto ignored the complaining, tightening the wraps and stating that they suited him perfectly. He told Hammett to get along well with him from now on. The spirit muttered a reluctant acknowledgement as long as it was to Haruto's liking, but then mentioned that this wasn't his only ability. Haruto looked up as a large floating screen appeared. Hammett pointed to a roulette board, explaining that Haruto could spin the random spell roulette once a day to use one spell regardless of its circle level. He noted that some of them, like Revive, could completely turn the tide of a battle. Haruto was shocked, asking if Revive meant he could come back to life even if he died. Hammett confirmed it was possible if he managed to land on that specific slot. Haruto asked if he had to spin it right now, but Hammett replied that he could use it whenever he wanted. The spirit's expression suddenly turned grim as he noted he had a bad feeling about something. He warned Haruto that it felt like someone was targeting him and that he could sense killing intent directed right at them. Haruto looked around the dark forest, wondering if some of the survivors had tracked them down. He admitted he couldn't feel any chi and asked if the spirit could tell which direction the threat was coming from. Hammett said he couldn't pinpoint it, but insisted his instincts had never been wrong. Haruto reached into his storage and pulled out a red board he had obtained from the mages earlier. Hammett yelled that this was not the time to chat as the system identified the item as an airboard, a teleportation tool used by high-level mages. Haruto formulated a plan, suggesting that since they couldn't pinpoint the location, it would be quicker to pretend they were not on guard to lure the enemy out. Hammett agreed that it made sense but warned the risk was too high. Haruto paused, asking if the spirit could read his thoughts. Hammett confirmed that since they were bound together, their consciousness was shared. Suddenly, an arrow whistled through the air and struck Haruto in the back. He let out a sharp cry of pain as a massive explosion of fire erupted, consuming his entire body. He fell to the forest floor with a heavy thud. From the shadows, a woman with red hair and horns looked at the fallen form, noting that the kill log wasn't showing up yet. She realized Haruto had survived the attack and ordered her partner to finish him off quickly. The archer teammate hesitated, suggesting that allies might be hiding nearby and decided to deploy detection magic just in case. As the archer drew his bow to fire again, his eyes widened in surprise. Haruto's hand reached up and caught the incoming arrow mid-flight. He let out a low chuckle, and the archer stammered in disbelief that he had stopped an arrow with his bare hands. Haruto stood up, looking at the wraps on his hands and noting that Hammett was pretty durable. The archer panicked, shouting for his partner to use all her magic on Haruto. The archer fired another shot. He thought to himself that it really paid to pick up everything he found. Blood sprayed as he struck the man, who gasped and wondered how Haruto could have shot an arrow from that distance. The red-haired witch screamed in anger, asking her partner what he was doing and reminding him she had told him to make sure Haruto was dead. Realizing she was outmatched, the witch hopped onto a magical broom and flew into the sky. She begged for help, crying out that she didn't want to die yet. Hammett noted that it was the first time he had seen someone escape on a broom, but added that it was what high-level witches usually did. He asked if Haruto was going to go after her, but Haruto declined, stating she didn't look that strong anyway. He decided they should gear up and move out instead. Haruto looked at the horizon, judging by the number of remaining players that the game should end in about 2 more days. He admitted he didn't know what made a second-timer like him assume that, but his prediction turned out to be completely wrong. Day 20 of the Cloyd Survival duo game arrived, and only 12 survivors remained out of 200. Haruto sat in the woods with a thick beard, complaining that eating jerky every day was making his jaw sore. He looked around the empty forest and wondered where the hell everyone was hiding, as he couldn't find anyone at all. Floating beside his master, Elsius Hammett asked if Aoyama Haruto was going out on patrol once again. Haruto responded that if the remaining survivors refused to show themselves, he had no choice but to go out and find them himself. He reached into his storage and pulled out his magical airboard, hopping onto it as it floated over the thick forest canopy. He remembered how he had been able to hunt down several weaklings up until the 5th day of the game, but as the days went by, finding even a single rat to eliminate became a genuine challenge. He had spent the last 10 days of the Cloyd Survival game actively scouring the shrinking map for anyone still hiding in the shadows. Haruto zoomed through the trees, telling Hammett that tracking down these hidden players was becoming truly exhausting. He asked the weapon spirit if he felt any presences nearby, but Hammett replied that it was unnaturally quiet, just as it had been the previous day. Haruto clicked his tongue in annoyance, thinking he had acquired a useful radar in Hammett but finding that the spirit was currently useless. Hammett explained that unless the enemy gave off a tangible sense of bloodlust, there was simply nothing much he could do to detect them. The landscape sped past beneath the board as Haruto noted the restricted area had shrunk to 1/6 of its original size, yet there were still plenty of places left to hide. He wondered where the hell everyone was, and Hammett suggested that if he simply left them alone, they would all gather in one spot eventually. Haruto urged the spirit to think about the situation for a moment, pointing out that his own name already filled the kill log as the top killer. He realized that if the remaining survivors decided to regroup, he would be forced into an 11 versus 1 fight, and in that scenario, even he would be toast. Haruto insisted that he needed to reduce their numbers before they had the chance to regroup and coordinate. Hammett then suggested that instead of wasting time searching, they should hunt the Black Argon. Haruto asked what the Black Argon was, and the spirit explained that it was the designated buff monster for this area. As the image of a massive, purple-scaled snake appeared in his mind, Haruto was shocked. He asked if the spirit meant that massive thing he had seen before and claimed there was no way he could take down such a beast alone. Hammett looked at him with a serious expression, stating that no matter how one looked at it, he didn't think Haruto would lose to the monster. Haruto demanded to know why the spirit was only telling him this now. Hammett replied that knowing Haruto's love for ambushes, he had simply assumed his master was intentionally saving the monster to use as bait for other players. Haruto stared back, seeking confirmation if the spirit was sure he could beat it, and Hammett answered with absolute certainty. Haruto cursed at the waste of time his previous searching had been and pushed his airboard into a high-speed dive. A few minutes later, he reached the edge of a rocky ravine where a large group of survivors was already engaged in a desperate struggle with the beast. One of the mages at the bottom was gasping for air, crying out that he was almost out of mana. An armored warrior with a scarred face and long blonde hair cursed the snake, demanding to know why it was so tough to kill. His companion encouraged the group, shouting that they should be able to finish it off soon if they pushed just a little more. The massive snake rumbled with a low growl before letting out a high-pitched shriek of rage. A player with orange hair suddenly looked toward the ridge and screamed in terror as he spotted the approaching intruder. He shouted for the others to hurry, warning them that Aoyama Haruto was coming their way. The lead warrior gritted his teeth, complaining that the top killer had arrived at the worst possible time. Hammett noted that their detection magic had successfully picked up Haruto's presence, and Haruto acknowledged the fact with a grim smile as he leapt from his board. Haruto landed on a rock ledge, counting 10 enemies left to deal with. Hammett corrected him, stating that there were actually 11 remaining players excluding Haruto himself. Haruto watched as magic explosions rocked the snake's body, wondering why he always ended up getting ganged up on at the end of every round. He noticed a glowing light sphere protecting the players and realized that as long as it was there, he couldn't get close enough for a melee strike. Haruto drew his bow, his knuckles glowing with electricity as he decided to observe the chaos from a distance for a few moments. Down in the pit, a warrior lunged at the snake, yelling for the damn creature to just die already. Haruto loosed an arrow that streaked across the battlefield with a sharp whistle, striking the warrior directly in the back of the neck. The man let out a sharp cry of pain as electricity coursed through his body, and the sudden paralysis left him defenseless as the massive snake lunged forward. The serpent's fangs sank into the warrior, and blood sprayed across the stone as he collapsed. The orange-haired player screamed that it was Aoyama Haruto and ordered everyone to find where the arrow had come from. Another survivor yelled that they should forget hunting the snake, warning that if this kept up, they would all be wiped out. Haruto watched the monster from his perch, noting that the beast's health was actually lower than he had thought it would be. Haruto crouched on a branch, wishing he could see the actual health numbers of the creature instead of guessing. He suddenly flinched as a projectile whizzed past his head. A player with a long ponytail spotted him and shouted that Haruto was using stealth to hide in the trees. The player ordered the mages to cast detection magic immediately and prioritize killing Aoyama Haruto above all else. Haruto looked at the man, thinking that he was a sharp one for noticing him so quickly. He decided he had better end the situation as fast as possible. He stood on the branch and began to pour every ounce of his inner energy into a single shot. His hand and arrow glowed with a brilliant golden light as he aimed his bow, resolving to finish the entire fight in a single blow. He loosed the energy-infused arrow, which became a blinding streak of light that roared toward the monster. The players below could only watch in awe as the projectile plunged deep into the gaping maw of the black argon. A massive explosion of golden energy erupted from within the snake, lighting up the entire forest and causing the creature to let out one final, deafening screech before being consumed by the blast. As the smoke cleared, the survivors looked around in confusion, asking if they had gotten the kill and which team had received the buff. They checked their systems as a notification chimed, confirming that the black argon had been slain. Haruto stood on his branch with a smug grin, whispering a thanks for the meal. A system alert congratulated him, announcing that Aoyama Haruto's stats had increased by 30% for the next 10 days. Suddenly, a voice from below shouted that there he was, spotting him on the tree. Haruto looked down at the remaining crowd of players as one of them argued that it was only a 30% boost and that if they all attacked together, they could still take him down to secure their rankings. They all charged into the woods after him as Haruto took off at a run. A man with a beard unleashed his black star chi palms, sending a blast of red energy toward Haruto. The young man watched the attack, asking himself if they really thought that move could catch him. He decided he would break their defensive barrier first. Haruto's fist glowed with blue light as he prepared his spatial strike, and he collided with the leading player in a massive shockwave that shattered the ground. The player let out a dying scream as the force of the hit crushed him. Haruto stood amidst the destruction, looking at his knuckles and telling the rest of the survivors to come at him. A system message appeared in the air, stating that Aoyama Haruto had killed Lu Zhaofeng with his fist arts. Staring at the glowing blue wraps on his hands, Aoyama Haruto realized that he had just got his hands on this new weapon spirit, and it already felt useless. He looked out at the group of survivors gathered in the clearing, noting that they were clearly wary of him and didn't seem to want to make a move until they had gauged his true strength. He narrowed his eyes, deciding that he would start by attacking the mage whose defensive barrier had already been destroyed. He broke into a sprint across the grass, telling himself that it was fine and he would show them exactly what they were up against. The ground cracked beneath his feet as he accelerated. One of the defenders pointed and screamed that here he came, warning the others to stay alert. The lead warrior commanded everyone to stop Haruto at all costs, shouting for them to protect the mages with their very lives. Haruto leapt high into the air, his silhouette framed against the sky as he descended upon the group. A bearded warrior snarled that Haruto shouldn't go thinking that he took orders from anyone, especially from the commander, but conceded that for now, he would join forces to defeat this common enemy. Haruto clicked his tongue in annoyance, noting how out of character it was for these disparate groups to be teaming up. As he landed, the warriors raised their shields and blades in a coordinated defense, acting as a wall of annoying bodyguards. Haruto gathered his energy and unleashed his unstoppable fist technique, slamming his knuckles into the Viking-like warrior's shield. The impact was massive, and the warrior groaned in shock, asking himself what kind of incredible strength he was facing. Another swordsman lunged forward, calling out his quaking dragon flash technique as his blade trailed a golden light. Haruto watched the strike with a cold focus, thinking that while the move was fast, it was not nearly fast enough to escape his eyes. He dodged the initial thrust, but his eyes widened when he realized the opponent was wielding a flexible sword made from highly elastic materials. The blade whipped around in a second quaking dragon flash, curving through the air to catch him off guard. Haruto grunted as he realized that the weapon was truly one of the most annoying he had encountered. He decided that at times like this, it was finally time to use a counter technique. He moved his arm in a fluid motion to parry the whipping steel, but the coordination of the group was relentless. A spearman from the side unleashed a piercing spear strike, forcing Haruto to twist away. He wondered how these strangers were working together so well under pressure. The Viking warrior laughed, shouting that it was finally over for Aoyama and claiming that now that he was caught in the path of the sword, there was absolutely no escape for him. Haruto felt the pressure closing in and called out to Hammett, asking the spirit if he could change his form right now. Hammett replied through their shared consciousness, asking if Haruto wanted him to change into whatever he was imagining. The spirit laughed and dismissed the request as child's play, transforming into a massive, heavy blade and shield. Haruto swung the new weapon with a roar, crushing through the Viking's defense. The warrior let out a pained scream of "ah" as his helmet was shattered and he was sent flying into the dirt. Haruto stood amidst the carnage, noting that there were now only 8 people left to deal with. He turned his gaze toward a mage in a purple hat who stood at the back of the group. The mage asked Haruto if he really thought they were unaware of his reputation, stating that he was notorious for slaughtering dozens of players single-handedly. He declared that everyone present was prepared to use every last drop of their power to bring him down. A pale-haired woman stepped forward, her hands glowing with a malevolent light as she explained they had developed a specific countermeasure just for him and had been waiting for this very moment. She unleashed a spell called Discharged, and a burst of blue magic washed over Haruto. He gasped in shock, asking what was happening as the energy constrained his movements. He cursed under his breath, realizing the situation was turning bad. A system notification appeared, explaining that Discharged was a curse that drastically lowered an enemy's stats. Another alert confirmed that all of Haruto's stats were reduced by 40% for the next 30 minutes. He gritted his teeth, thinking he should have dealt with that woman first as she prepared another orb of energy. Haruto panted for breath, feeling the weight of the debuff. The survivors noticed his weakened state, shouting that he was even weaker now than he had been before he received the dragon's buff. They yelled that they finally had a chance to win and urged everyone to finish him off. They treated the encounter like a hunt, shouting that it was first come, first served for his rare items. Haruto snarled that there was no way he was going to let them kill him so easily. He launched a kick at an approaching knight, but the warrior only groaned slightly before regaining his balance. The knight let out a relieved phew, noting that he had taken the hit well and that the witch's curse was clearly working. He raised his sword and screamed for Aoyama to die. Haruto was forced onto the defensive, dodging as the knight's blade shattered the ground where he had been standing. He turned to run, but the mages wouldn't let up, calling for Escrow's flame to consume the area. Fire erupted all around him, and a warrior followed up with a mega strike that sent Haruto reeling with a pained ga. As Haruto struggled to his feet, Hammett appeared behind him, laughing and remarking that this was quite the predicament they had found themselves in. Haruto told the spirit to shut up if he wasn't going to help. He calculated his chances, realizing he was only holding out because his 30% boss buff was partially offsetting the 40% debuff. He knew that if he hadn't managed to snatch that buff earlier, that single hit would have killed him instantly. He resolved that he had to kill the witch to break the curse once and for all. The purple-hatted mage was surprised, noting that even 5-circle magic wasn't enough to kill Haruto and acknowledging that his magic resistance was truly serious. The mage ordered the warriors to switch to physical attacks, commanding them to charge in and engage Haruto in close combat. Haruto noted the mage was quick on his judgment and regretted not killing him during the initial surprise attack. He looked toward the back of the clearing and wondered what the kid in the mage hat had been doing this whole time. The lead mage also noticed the boy, wondering why the little brat was just standing there without making any attacks. The mage turned his attention back to Haruto, stating that even with high magic resistance, there was no way he could block the upcoming spell. He channeled his power into a stone edge attack, summoning massive pillars of rock from the earth. The stone columns erupted beneath Haruto, sending shards of rock flying. Haruto realized he couldn't dodge them all, thinking they were successfully limiting his movements. The mage then called for a stone hammer, and a gigantic boulder surged from the ground to strike Haruto midair. He let out a scream of pain as he was sent flying, blood spraying into the air. As he tumbled toward the ground, a warrior leapt above him with 2 swords raised to finish the job. Suddenly, a small voice called out the name of Escrow's wind blade. A green crescent of air sliced through the clearing, striking one of the mages. A system message appeared, stating that Lyle had attacked Zephyrna with magic. The witch looked around in horror just as she was struck down. Another system notification announced that the Dis-All debuff had been removed and Haruto's status would return to normal. Haruto gasped as he felt his strength return. The bearded swordsman lunged at him, but Haruto caught the man's arm and felt his power surge. The swordsman was terrified, stammering that the debuff was suddenly gone and asking how it was possible. Haruto looked over and was stunned to see Lyle standing in the clearing. He asked what the kiddo was doing there, and Lyle looked back with tears in his eyes, begging Aoyama to please win. His plea was interrupted as a warrior named Smith appeared behind the boy and drove a sword through his back. Lyle coughed up blood as the system confirmed that Smith had attacked Lyle with a sword. The moment Haruto witnessed the boy's death, a surge of violent anger welled up in his chest. He remembered that all he had done was give the boy a few spare items, and he had honestly thought that he wouldn't care in the slightest what became of the child. He grabbed the face of the warrior in front of him, questioning if what he was feeling was anger towards those who could kill a child without hesitation or if it was gratitude for the small boy who had sacrificed everything for his sake. He wondered if a man like himself, who had taken so many lives in this game, was really capable of feeling sympathy or pity now. As he ran those questions over in his mind again and again, he suddenly came back to himself and realized that his rage had fueled a total massacre. He looked around and found that the only one left alive on that entire blood-soaked battlefield was Aoyama Haruto alone. A system chime echoed through the silent forest, announcing that Cloyd Survival had ended. The screen congratulated him, stating that he had emerged as the final survivor and was now qualified to participate in the next game.
Hey everyone, before we continue with the story, I have a small favor to ask. I'm currently on a mission to hit my first 1,000 subscribers, so I can keep making these long-form recaps for you full-time. If you're enjoying the journey so far, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It's completely free, and it honestly means the world to a small creator like me. Now, let's get back to the action.
Aoyama Haruto stood in the quiet clearing, reflecting on how he had lost to Zorochana at the very last moment during his previous attempt. He looked at the blood on his hands and wondered if he had actually managed to win this time. A notification appeared before his eyes, offering congratulations and stating that he had emerged as the final survivor and was now qualified to participate in the next game. Haruto was startled, asking if the game was really ending right now. He realized with growing frustration that he still had not done any farming of the loot left by the dozens of players he had just eliminated. He lunged toward the piles of treasure chests, shouting that as long as he could just touch them, they should be added to his permanent item list. However, as his fingers brushed the wood, a message informed him that the game had ended and item collection could no longer be performed because the item list had been finalized. Haruto cursed his luck as the rewards vanished into digital dust. The system tallied his final score, informing him that he had gained 240 coins for the match, 100 bonus coins for achieving the most kills, and an additional 15 coins for reaching the top 5 twice in a row. He was stunned to see a total of 355 coins, remembering that back in the first game, he had only managed to earn 140. Elsius Hammett materialized beside him, laughing boastfully and claiming it was all thanks to his magnificent self that Haruto had emerged victorious. The system displayed Hammett's price as 100 coins, and Haruto admitted that the spirit was useful, but told him to be honest, he was still kind of mid. Hammett ignored the insult, urging his master to exchange the rewards and pick him. Haruto questioned the cost, suggesting that paying 100 coins for the spirit seemed a bit much. Hammett was offended, shouting that being able to purchase his magnificent self for such a low price was practically a steal. Haruto scrolled through the available rewards, noting that there were other things that seemed much more useful, such as a cloak of hiding for 70 coins. He toyed with the idea of trying his luck with a golden weapon box instead, causing Hammett's face to twist into a look of betrayal. The spirit asked if his master had any sense of loyalty at all. A notification interrupted them, stating that the last 5 surviving players were permitted to spin a reward roulette. Haruto realized he had completely forgotten about the roulette feature. As the winner, the system granted him 3 spin attempts. Hammett clasped his hands together and prayed, begging for Haruto to get a high-value prize and specifically asking to be the one chosen so he wouldn't have to go back inside a storage box. Haruto called for the wheel to stop, and it landed on Escrow's necklace, valued at only 1 coin. Haruto cursed, asking if this was basically like getting cheap complimentary items. Hammett clutched his head, complaining that he felt like they had gotten the same junk last time and wondering if it was a bug. Haruto told Hammett to calm down, noting that there were still 2 spins left. The second roulette spin began, and Haruto watched the blurring items before calling for another stop. The wheel landed on selfish Hammett. The spirit cheered, shouting that he didn't have to go back inside that box again. Haruto mused that while it would have been perfect if he had gotten the golden weapon box instead, saving 100 coins on the spirit wasn't too bad. On the third and final spin, he received a fragmented secret tome valued at 60 coins. Haruto was skeptical, asking if the item was truly worth 60 coins and wondering how many more of them he would need to collect before he could finish the set. After giving it a lot of thought, he decided to use his remaining coins to buy 2 fourth circle stones, an Iceland spellbook, a vital essence pill, Tokar's ring, and the cloak of hiding. He noted he had 49 coins left over and figured they would come in handy during the next game. With his item selection complete, the system offered him words of praise, wishing that fortune would be with him in his next game and informing him that he could retrieve his items from his subspace inventory. Haruto felt the world around him dissolve. He suddenly came back to himself on a stone staircase in the real world. A woman nearby screamed in terror, asking what had happened to him and noting that he was covered in blood. Haruto realized he was exactly where he had been when he was first summoned. He quickly offered an excuse, telling the bystanders that they were shooting a film nearby and laughing as he claimed the blood was fake. As he walked away, he thought to himself that it was going to be a real pain if this happened every time he returned. He finally made it back to his apartment, noting that he had only just finished his second game but could already feel that he was much stronger than he had been the first time around. He pulled off his ruined jersey and sighed, thinking what a waste it was because it had been his favorite one. He sat on the floor in his underwear, deciding that now that it was his second time, he would immediately sort his growth out as soon as he got home. He knew that for any gamer, the fundamentals of improving stats boiled down to thorough efficiency and optimization. He reminded himself that the golden rule was getting the most time-consuming tasks out of the way first. He pulled out a fourth circle stone and used it, let out a pained scream as the power surged into his body. 3 hours later, he used the red cloud pill elixir, resulting in more agonizing groans. 6 hours after his return, Haruto sat on the floor, sweat dripping from his brow as he admitted he just couldn't get used to the pain and heat of the absorption process. However, he felt that his core was finally fully recharged. He stood up and stretched, sensing that his mana and base stats had increased quite a lot. He called for his status window and marveled at how much his inner energy and mana had grown. He noted that he was now a human warrior mage with 55 strength, 40 stamina, and 20 magic resistance, while his special status showed 360 inner energy and 60 mana. He realized that if he had grown this much after only 2 games, the next round would be insane. Feeling a wave of exhaustion, he decided to grab something to eat. Suddenly, Hamet's voice roared from the table, calling Haruto a shitty master and asking how long he intended to ignore him. Haruto sighed, reaching for his necklace and asking Hamet if he could speak a bit more quietly. The spirit demanded to know what Haruto was thinking by keeping him in that dark subspace. Haruto admitted that Hamet had great ability, but he was simply too noisy. Hamet screamed in protest, asking what he meant by noisy and stating that weapons with a soul like his were few and far between. Haruto ignored the complaining and pulled out his phone, deciding to order some food. He commanded the digital assistant, Seri, to find a Chinese restaurant nearby. As the phone responded that it had found 5 locations, Hamet was stunned. He asked what the device was and why a voice was coming from a small box. Haruto explained that in his world, there was no shortage of tools that could talk, telling the spirit that even if he was the great Lord Hamet, he was hardly a big deal here. Hamet flexed his spectral muscles, insisting he wasn't special just because he could talk but because he was an amazing weapon. The phone chimed, announcing that the food order had been placed. Haruto noted that in this world, a person needed a permit just to carry a single longsword, so he asked the spirit what he should do with him. Hamet suggested he could transform into a form that wrapped around Haruto's hand, just like in the game. Haruto rejected the idea, pointing out that if he walked around outside with the spirit wrapped around his hand, people would think he was weird. Hamet then tried transforming into a cloak, but Haruto still felt it made him stand out too much and suggested Hamet stay in the subspace. Haruto looked in a mirror and finally commanded Hamet to take the form of a necklace. He decided that the small blue pendant was acceptable. Hamet was pleased, boasting that he knew his master wouldn't be able to resist his charm and noting that the form came with a built-in killing intent detector. The doorbell rang, and a voice announced the arrival of the delivery service. Haruto went to the door, happy that his food was finally here. A few minutes later, he was finishing his meal with a satisfied burp. He noted that he had been eating nothing but dried meat for ages and that eating something greasy really brought him back to life. Hamet asked if the food was good, but Haruto told him that since he couldn't eat anyway, he shouldn't bother asking. Hamet called him a heartless master, saying he was still curious about the taste. Haruto stood up and began to get dressed. When Hamet asked where they were going, Haruto replied that since the spirit was coming along anyway, he shouldn't bother answering. Hamet grumbled that his master had a point. A few minutes later, Haruto arrived at a neon-lit internet cafe. A staff member greeted him, noting it had been a while and saying she had wondered if something had happened to him. Haruto explained he had been busy getting ready for school and had just popped in for a break. She mentioned they were holding a tournament for a game called Loyal Ground next week and asked if he wanted to join. Haruto replied that he had already dropped that game because he had found another interesting one. As he walked to a computer, Hamet's voice came from the ring on his finger, asking what the other game was. Haruto explained that Loyal Ground was just a budget version of Cloyd Survival. He sat at a terminal, thinking that now that he had a taste of the real thing, no other game could satisfy him. He revealed the real reason he came to the cafe after 2 months was to research his opponents. He remembered the high schooler from the previous match and wondered if he was a mage or a swordsman. He recalled that the boy was definitely wearing a Japanese school uniform despite the real-time translation of his speech. Haruto reasoned that if he could match with someone like that, there must be plenty of other players both locally and abroad. He knew that among them, there were bound to be attention seekers who wanted to show off that they were players. He decided it never hurt to gather information on the competition. He discovered that most players interacted via a deep web browser and decided to give it a shot. He navigated past scammers and adult sites until he found a banner for the survivor's message board. As he clicked the link, his screen turned blood red with the question, "Are you a survivor?" Haruto hesitated for a moment before clicking yes, his eyes widening as he whispered a question about what he had just found.
Most people miss the real story. Subscribe if you want to see everything.